o'clock, so I will call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. It is, as you know, a special meeting, so we'll be a little bit more informal than we typically are. One thing I wanted to find out, are there any people here from the Transportation Commission? Yes, okay. Welcome. If there is room up here and you would prefer sitting up here, you're welcome to do that. We invited Transportation Commission members because of kind of the overlap on some of the fire issues. So anyway, glad to have you. We do not have anybody registered for public comment. Are there any communications, disclosures, or recusals? Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Nope. Okay, very good. And we don't have any minutes to do. We have a pretty full agenda, so if we don't get through everything, we don't, but I commit to cutting off at 8 o'clock on the special meetings. And when you do speak, because these are being recorded, and I think this is mic'd so that you can hear better, please do use the microphone. So thank you. And I will turn it over to the first item on our agenda, Bill and Matt from the fire department, and if you could introduce yourselves before you do your presentation. One thing I'd like to find out is, do you prefer questions as we move through it or at the end?
Personally, I like questions during, because
Okay.
then because that's fresh in your
That's
mind,
fine.
and we can do that. So
Okay, perfect. Okay,
works for us.
you're on.
So thank you. My name is Bill Sullivan. I'm the fire marshal for the Madison Fire Department. I've been working with the fire department for almost 17 years now. I oversee all of the fire prevention as well, which includes not only community education and routine fire inspections, but also new construction, which is a part of what fire access will come into play.
My name is Matt Hamilton. I'm the fire protection engineer. I've been on for about 6 months now. So my tasks are dealing with plan reviews and things like that, code related questions.
So ultimately, I'm handing these duties over to Matt to do plan review on fire access plans as developments come through as part of my promotion and Matt's hire. So
Big shoes to fill.
nah, we'll be all right. So kind of tonight, kind of things that we wanted to cover tonight was what is the purpose of fire access regulations? Why do we have fire lanes in the code? We also want to talk about some of the code requirements, where they come from. And then there was a special request to make sure we talk about some of the other concepts that we do locally. And one of them is a 25% of the perimeter of the building that allows us some flexibility that the code may not otherwise allow. We'll talk about how we work with designers and developers and give them options when they do their building construction. Because when they start with a building, they're going to come out of the building code. They get to pick what they build out of, how big to build it, and that brings in different code requirements. And then we'll talk about how we've established some equivalency options that allow some, hey, the round peg does not always fit in the square hole. So we recognize that. So in a basic structure fire response, building fire, we are automatically sending 3 engines, 2 ladders, a medic, and a command vehicle to every reported building fire. That right there is that's a lot of space real estate we're talking about. The reason we do that is we got a significant number of tasks that we have to accomplish. And you see in the picture here that this house is a very dangerous situation, and we need to have everything coordinated and happen in a very close, timely manner. Right? Everybody kind of equates that we'll have one engine that does fire attack. Right? That's pulling the hoses, putting the wet stuff on the red stuff, putting the fire out. We'll have another engine company that's going to establish a water supply for us. So they're the vehicle that's connecting to a fire hydrant and laying hose to the scene, or we can do it the other direction, depending on which way trucks come in and lay out. The other thing that we have a crew do, one typically a ladder company, is we don't always know if somebody's in that building or not. So we'll have a third company that's going to go interior and look and search spaces to see make sure everybody's out. All right. While that's also happening, when those engine company goes inside with the hoses, there's a lot of heat in there. So the second ladder company will actually be up on the roof, and we'll cut a hole in the roof to let the smoke and the heat come out. And then our fifth rig is typically assigned what's called the safety engine, RIT engine, and they are going to be there to, if one of our crew members get in trouble, they are on the ready to go pull that crew member out and pull that team out. And that's kind of a national standard requirement. So that's kind of why we have to send so many trucks to this scene and eat up that space. We'll go back to the command just real quick, Matt. Thank you. Then we got our command vehicle. They're there to manage the incident, track our personnel. That's what the chief is typically riding in. And so they need to be in a spot where they can see what things are going on and keep track of everything. And then we, of course, bring an ambulance. We never know who's hurt. We never know when our own people get hurt. So we always have an ambulance on scene. And I talked a little bit about the rapid intervention rescue team. One of the things I don't think I did a slide on, but once we know and we confirm that it's a working fire, we automatically add another engine and another medic, because that's the kind of staffing that we are going to need to be able to safely address these kind of situations. So why do fire lane widths matter? Large apparatus. These trucks are, the ladder truck is probably 45 feet long. Yes, they are 8 feet wide. They have to be able to drive down the normal road that everybody else drives down, but we have to be able to get equipment off of that. So when we open up the doors and then pull off a fan or other equipment, we have to be able to navigate around those doors. And so that's where a lot of this extra space comes in. So it's more than just about driving down the road. It's about how much space do we have to be able to operate on a scene. And there's more than one unit going to be coming in. We talked about that. But also from a ladder truck, if you look at the lower left-hand picture, that is our ladder truck, aerial ladder truck, that has its outriggers, so stabilizers that have been extended, so that provides stability, because when we put the ladder truck up in the air and we turn it left or right, the truck will tip over if we don't have those stabilizers out. So when our bigger trucks are set up, this is probably 18 feet wide from pad to pad that's on the ground for stability wise. Okay, so that's where a lot of these numbers come from.
Just a comment. We talked some at our last Plan Commission meeting. Complete Green Streets came up, and Complete Green Streets there's a conflict, I guess I would say, between Complete Green Streets and some of the desired lane widths to accommodate this kind of thing. So just wanted to mention that, so that it all comes into play here.
Sure. Thank you, Linda. So, yeah, and every situation can be different. If I've got a single-family home or a two-story building, we're going to be able to reach that with our ground ladders that we carry on our trucks. But anything over 30 feet, our ground ladders aren't going to reach that. So where does this stuff come from, right? We tend to operate more on the technical side, Matt and I do. So we are being driven by the state building codes and fire codes. A lot of people ask, well, how does this happen? I never had heard of this before. A lot of that predates the building code. The state of Wisconsin did not adopt a model building code until July 1 of 2002. So anything built prior to that there was no requirements for fire lanes in the state of Wisconsin. So we just kind of had to deal with what we had to deal with. And then once the state went to that model code, then those fire lanes were defined in the International Fire Code. And that's adopted statewide. There are some nuances that some municipalities might be using NFPA 1 versus the IFC, and there might be some little extensions in some of these numbers, but the fire lane itself is still 20 feet, and it is still required on all these buildings. Okay. So the International Fire Code covers all new buildings. So anything that's constructed today has to follow the International Building Code. So this is what building inspection is applying when plans come in for review. Those definitions are probably different than what we might see from the Planning Commission or from the Planning Commission, but from the Planning Department. But this is where the technical piece comes in. We don't apply the building code to 1 and 2 family homes. We don't apply it to farms, and we don't apply it to Indian land reservations. Okay? Let Matt speak a little bit.
Yeah, great. So there's 2 types of fire access roads or fire lanes. I'll kind of speak short there a little bit. There's a fire apparatus access road, which covers all public commercial buildings, regardless of height, things like that. So it could be a 1-story building. It could be a 20-story building.
How do you define public buildings?
So public building, good question. Public building is defined by the state statute, and it is basically any place that people work or are employed, or more than 2 dwelling units. So apartment buildings fall under the commercial building code and is defined by the state. So they have a public places of employment and public buildings.
Excuse me, Bill.
Sorry.
You talk about exceptions being 1 and 2 dwelling units. Sorry. You talk about an exception being 1 or 2 dwelling units. Would an accessory dwelling unit count as a what if you had a single family dwelling with an accessory building out back?
Yeah. So thank you. The state code has a different code for 1 and 2 family homes, uniform dwelling code, and they would apply separately to the number of units in the single building. So you could have a duplex, would be a 1 or 2 family home, and you could have a accessory dwelling unit as long as they're separated by a distance, and it's defined in the code, typically more than 10 feet. That would be looked at independently of everything else.
Okay, thanks.
So the second kind of fire access road is an aerial fire apparatus access road or aerial lane. That's for buildings that are over 30 feet in height. Bill had talked earlier about our ground ladders not being able to reach higher than really 30 feet is about the limit for a 35-foot ladder, which is what they carry. And that's where we look to have the ladder trucks start doing some of that elevated work. So fire apparatus access roads for all new buildings of any height. That allows us to get these engines close enough to a building to operate. So we're not 800 feet away trying to drag hose. They're 20 feet wide, 13 feet 6 inches clear. So you might see some skywalks. We need to have clearance to get underneath skywalks or things like that. 28-foot inside turn radius. Large apparatus are hard to turn and get through. You can't make hairpin turns with these rigs. So they need to be able to reach all the exterior walls from the lane itself within 150 feet. That is for an unsprinklered building. And there's an allowance if the building is sprinklered to extend that to 250 feet. We're looking at that as, the building itself has a little more protection, so we can gain a little ground there. They do need to be hard surfaced and support the weight of a heavy fire truck at 85,000 pounds. And then that fire lane itself needs to be within 500 feet of 2 fire hydrants for a commercial building.
So am I correct that these kinds of requirements then would impact canopy trees planted in terraces, and impact then width of public streets. And anyway, yeah, those are two questions.
So absolutely, but we have to go back to the beginning, and the developer has to provide these fire apparatus access lanes, right? We have continuously operate under the mindset that the public street is designed for the best interest of the public, and we always typically defer to what traffic engineering needs are and some of those other elements. The rub comes in that we have to wrestle with is that the planning may need more urban approaches, and those don't always match up close near each other, right? So we can say we build smaller buildings and have less density, or we can have the developer put the fire lane on their own private property and have narrower public streets and have canopy trees that are, very closely together. And we could have that, but then then does that create some other rubs with not get the density that we want, or reduced impervious surfaces and some of those other things? So we have tried to work with traffic engineering and forestry to allow the developers to coordinate and use the public streets where plausible, so that we don't end up, instead of having, a 20-foot wide public street in the front and then have a 26-foot wide area lane in the back, we could have potentially get by with one 26-foot wide street in the public street. And I think Matt has a slide coming up that we have worked with trees and come to a conclusion that what we've tried to do is try to space the trees out a little bit so that we can have some canopy trees, but then leave some space in between the canopy so that we can theoretically push our ladder between the canopies and get to the face of the building if we needed to, and be able to reach that building. So that's a compromise that we have done locally for that.
Go ahead.
So, Bill, if a building, you can reach it from a fire lane within 150 feet, then that one fire lane would suffice to cover the whole building, so they wouldn't need to provide more access around. Is that fairly correct?
Fairly correct. There's two things that we'll have. Well, the two types of fire lanes, we always start with establishing the regular 20-foot wide fire lane, and you would be correct if I can get to all exterior portions of the building in the slide that Matt has up there now. If I can get that from the front of the building and I can do 150 feet of hose around either side, that would be sufficient. Okay. What sometimes happens is now if I go over 30 feet in height, and now we don't have the space in the public street because of parking or whatever it is, or the trees or overhead power lines, our ladder truck can't set up, raise its ladder, and then swing in to reach the building. So that may incorporate some additional access lanes. So we got to look at them as almost separately.
Okay. So I think about 2 years ago, so we had a building that had like a 30-foot setback. I think it was like a 4 or 5 story multifamily unit or building, and the terrace part prevented the fire truck from being able to get it. So I think that was one of the discussions we had on either moving the terrace some more or creating a fire lane. So that was the reason, was the fire truck couldn't get the ladder and the hoses couldn't get to the far side.
Yeah, you got that slide, Matt. Well, how about we come back to that one, because Matt's got a few slides on that, and we do have an allowance to address that.
So this was just a demonstration of what we would look at a very basic fire apparatus lane, where you could get all the way around a building. The second fire lane would be the aerial lane. This is where buildings are over 30 feet high. They do need to be wider, as you saw in those pictures before with the outriggers of that ladder truck out. There's an increased width for that truck. So that's where the 26-foot wide fire lane or aerial fire apparatus access lane comes in. That allows us to reach the building, get up elevated heights over 30 feet. The IFC requires them to be 15 to 30 feet from the edge of the building in the standard. And we'll hit on that. That gets right to your question or comment, and we'll hit on that just a little bit down the road here. It does need to be parallel to one entire side, so that way we can get to the roof or the one side of the building. And then we do need to look at overhead obstructions, power lines. You know, we can't run a metal ladder through power lines. It's just not safe. And this is where the trees would come in too. We talked about one entire side of the building, and I think Liddell, you had the question about the concept of 25% of the perimeter. The point of that was sometimes you cannot get an entire side of the building, so we're looking at multiple access points, but we wanted to have 25% of that building covered. So essentially one side in total. And I've got a slide here. So this would be one entire side of a building. The red would designate this fire lane here. And then this would be multiple sides covering 25% of that building. So roughly 25%.
So a couple little shorter spots, a couple of shorter spots we still have room to set up the truck, but maybe on that public street side, we had some other conflicts because of overhead power lines or the tree canopies, right? And we can be flexible on that, but we need the developers to work through that with us.
And then here's our tree spacing allowance. You'll have to excuse my MS Paint art here. But this was trying to show the gaps in the trees where we could set up a ladder truck and work between them. So we can extend it, get between the trees and get up to the roof or a deck or a patio, balcony, something like that if we had to perform a rescue from an elevated surface.
In situations like that, how far apart would you all like for the tree canopies to be if it is at all possible?
So what we have done and agreed to is that depending on the mature width of the canopy, the tree species, so if these are 20-foot wide canopy trees, we would want 20 feet space in between the canopies, so they would be planted on a 40-foot spacing, period.
So there are some code allowances for fire lanes. And I hit on it a little bit earlier. If the building is sprinklered, it allows for us to have a little bit more of a distance that we can do a hose lay or a hose pull. And we need to look at some things for topography, waterways. If there's a retention pond or something, we'd have to look, how that hose would have to lay down on the ground. And then for aerial lanes, they're strictly not required for, I'm going to say, non-combustible buildings type 1A, 1B, or 2A.
What does that mean?
So that means a non-combustible building would be essentially concrete, steel. You can probably hit the full definitions from memory.
Yeah. So start to thinking about high-rise buildings, all right? So this is type 1 construction is going to be concrete. The A and the B just means there's some extra ratings on some of the structural elements. And then a type 2 construction is made out of steel. Let's think about I-beams, everything, all the structural supports, steel. And the A means that those structural supports, columns and girders are going to have some extra fire protection proofing on them that lets them withstand exposure to fire for a minimum of 2 hours.
So we have one building, I believe it's on East Washington, that I think we approved that has the wood.
So the heavy timber?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that ends up being, heavy timber ends up being a type 4 construction type. So that would still need to have aerial access. And actually the code that goes, because it's coming in some newer additions that aren't necessarily adopted yet, that they'll actually have some extra requirements from a aerial, or I shouldn't say aerial, but from a fire protection standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
So back up a little bit. So a non-combustible building, like Bill said, high rises with fire sprinklers and stairs to the roof with a standpipe would not require aerial access.
What's a standpipe?
A standpipe?
Sorry.
Question. No. That's our training topic for this quarter. It is a large pipe with hose valves on it that firefighters connect to. And so you don't have to run a hose all the way up a stairwell. You connect to that and then you can operate on a fire floor. If anybody takes the stairs down, there's a brass valve hanging out the wall. That is a standpipe valve. There's here. I did the sprinklers here, so I know it's a 4-inch pipe in the wall.
Okay.
So that's what a standpipe is. So what can be used for fire roads or fire lanes? Public roads need to account for parking and width. Driveways, parking lots on a building site. So if pick an apartment building, for example, you can use that parking lot as a fire lane where the drive lane is. Or there can be dedicated fire lanes, just basic roads alongside a building. You'll see that sometimes on large warehouses, things like that. Designer options of a public road is not an option.
So now what happens if they're struggling to meet that, whether or not the public street isn't there, or there may be some other challenges of trying to achieve some type of density, right? They can provide the dedicated fire lanes on their property. That's always an option. Yes, they can build shorter buildings. They're choosing to build to the height that they're choosing to build for various reasons, but from the code perspective, that's their choice. They can do a higher class of construction. So we talked about one of the equivalencies that we have allowed is that we might say that I can build what's typically a type 5, which would be wood frame construction, stick built. That might be a class 5B that doesn't have fireproofing on the structural elements. They might choose to build to a 5A construction type, which the general then ends up putting on more typically drywall, but provides extra protection on those structural elements that allows that building to have a fire and stand up longer while being exposed to a fire, and provides more time for us to be able to operate in there. So that's where some of this stuff comes in. Or they can also share fire access with their neighboring properties. We have a lot of dedicated cross-access easements. We have a lot of dedicated fire lanes that the neighbor had to put the fire lane on their property for their building. And they're like, okay, well, we can come to an agreement and you can offset some costs and pay to use, well, I'll let you use my fire lane in case of emergency. So those are options out there. So we have developed an equivalency guide that has been around for a number of years that developers may take a look at, and we give them some options that kind of offset those needs that we talked about earlier about what we need to do from a fire perspective. And if we can find some other options of doing that, they can have a conversation with us, and we try to establish, hey, if I need to get up on the roof to cut a hole in the roof, having 2 stairs to the roof, that is probably actually safer for us. It might be a little bit slower, but it's actually safer for us. They went above and beyond the code minimum because they're only required to have one stair to the roof. We asked for 2. That's a trade-off that we typically accept to establish those things.
So when do you work all this out? Because one of the questions I had, which you know, Bill, is that in some of our conditions that we see as plan commissioners, it doesn't mention the equivalency. It just has the, kind of straight down. So when do you establish those and work it out? And why isn't that mentioned in the conditions?
Sure. So we do, Matt or I typically sees the submitted plans before they come to the commission, right? We do typically write comments on there about when we say provide fire lanes, then that means they haven't addressed it or haven't shown it or documented it for us. So we know that it's out there. The problems that we have had, and we've heard from some developers, is they well, we know we have to do this. We don't like you to put that comment on there because then we have to address it in front of the Plan Commission. So it's a balancing act for us to be able to understand how far they go about when we start to say a project. Because it's not like when a project comes through and they haven't shown it that the project's unviable, right? So we're trying to walk that fine line, and we'll be glad to take some feedback, and if we want to take a different approach to that, we can do that. So then typically what happens is after it goes through the Planning Commission, when they come back through the verification step, that's when we're typically working hand in hand with the developer to establish what that equivalency might be if they can't provide the fire lane. We feel, at least my understanding is that when a significant amount of these plans come through before they get to you guys, is that they're still flushing a lot of things out, and there's still a lot of moving parts. And so sometimes we feel like if we make the comment too soon, they feel like they have not been able to, they haven't fully vetted out their project yet. And so we've taken that little more when it comes through the first phase of the plan submittal. We're taking more of a, hey, this is a reminder, make sure you incorporate this into your design. And then it's then more formalized and finalized before we do final sign off, before they can get there as part of that condition.
So what you're saying is then what we see when it says provide a fire lane, it might not end up that way, that there's a fire lane, but rather they may choose to do a higher level of construction. Is that what you're saying?
They would
may happen after what we see?
It very well might, yes. And I think that the struggle is they're still trying to figure out what some of those other elements, and is the massing the right size? Do they need to shrink something down? Do they need to shift the building on the site? And so some of those things go directly to where does the fire lane end up? And so that's why we've taken that approach to say, developer, designer, don't forget you're obligated to do this as part of the building code. That's your responsibility. And so that way you guys know that, hey, that's still out there and it hasn't been finalized, and then they'll have to come back to us and be able to either configure the site, whether that's increasing some fire width, maybe it might be just documenting. Sometimes they just don't even document it. And that's why we say the comment.
Commissioner Heck.
So this might be a question for Kevin or Bill, but if there are substantial changes after it's been approved by Plan Commission, I would think it could possibly fall into a major alteration to an approved conditional use or something like that. Does that sometimes happen?
It does, and I think, when the Plan Commission is seeing the drawings, they are, maybe seeing typically not construction level, maybe 70% complete drawings, and so when that final sign-off is coming, we're getting much more, a full complete set. But yes, I would say that what our role at least at planning staff's role is we have to make sure that it's consistent with the concept approved by the Plan Commission. So let's just say the building, I guess I'll give a real obvious example. If a building is pushed back on the site 20 feet, that would be an alteration that would somehow need a more larger review. If the building is nudged, a foot or a couple of feet in one direction, but it's essentially the same project that the Plan Commission saw, then I would say that's probably more either a minor alter or a design progression.
Okay, thank you.
So, you've indicated that a lot of developers, they know all this stuff. But what about, newer developers? How do you make sure that they know the range of options available to them in terms of equivalency?
So we do have our equivalency guide on our website. We are exploring, one of the projects I've put onto Matt now is looking at more codifying our options, and whether it be local ordinance or something along that lines, or a more definitive if this then that scenario. So those are some of the things that we are working on. But then we also, hopefully, the planning department does a great job of steering them towards the development assistance team, and then we're represented there, and we provide input at that level as well. And so that, I think that heads off probably 90% of our issues, at least we feel that.
Thank you.
Once the project, thank you. Once the project is approved by Plan Commission and Council, and, they have to go ahead, like, can you say, like, how often do you do any inspection checks in between to assure that whatever was agreed upon is happening? Or do you just do a final inspection at the end and say, this doesn't pass code or it passed code?
So obviously, we do the verification, we review the verification steps. So when they do those design documents, those are the official approved plans that they're supposed to be doing construction to. I would say we are not doing inspections of the fire lanes during construction. It's going to be at some point when we start to see the site develop closer towards the end that we might see this is really a problem. But I don't know that I've come across that in my time that was anything that was significantly different that became a problem.
That was going to be my next question, if you have an average of how often these go wrong, but you answered already. Thank you.
So another sorry, jeez, got too close. So going back to the commission, the comment over here, we do have a requirement that the aerial access lane needs to be within 15 feet of the near edge to 30 feet, and that is so that if we're so far away, we lose most of our reach, or if we're so close, the ladder is so tall, the tip, it's almost overshooting 2 floors. So that's where that 15 to 30 feet requirement in the fire code comes from. One of our other equivalencies that we do see quite a bit, and that happens in that 4-story, 5-story range, is we'll allow that fire lane to slide further out and allow a bigger terrace if it's a shorter building and they can show that we can still reach 6 feet above and 6 feet past either the parapet or the eave of the roof line. And that allows that to slide out a little bit. So there can be parking in the street in between the building and the fire lane. There can be wider terraces, but again, that might have a direct impact on how tall those buildings are. Now, once you get to about a 7-story building, now they're typically going to be built out of a type 1 or type 2 construction. They may be looking for a type 2B, which doesn't automatically eliminate the aerial lane, but they're close enough that it shouldn't be that difficult to up their class of construction to get there to offset that. We also provide, and this does get included with the planning packets, is that we do provide a worksheet to all the developers when they come in, and then they can use this as a guide to make sure that they're addressing, if they answer yes to all these questions, they should be pretty good, or if they got a couple not applicables, that'll work fine, but then that'll provide a little bit of a guidance, and then the code references for that. And again, this should not be foreign because this is not holistically a local ordinance. This is required elsewhere. Now, we do run into the occasion that we're privileged to have the resources that we have in fire prevention to be able to put resources to verifying these things that other communities may not, but it is a requirement that is applicable across the state. Our equivalency guide, and that I think you guys have a copy of that, and that's available on our website. And the last but not least, we've not done a lot of this, but there is always a building board of appeal. So anything in the building code can be appealed to a citizen building board of appeals through the city of Madison. So typically they are looking for some other alternative of why you can't comply with the code, and this is what you're providing in lieu of. They typically are not supporting variances that say just because, well, I don't want to do it or I chose to do this, and so therefore I can't do it, it's usually going to be tied to something along that lines, or some type of existing building with some type of hardship that we're not out there looking to tear down the state capitol because they don't have the required aerial access because they did a small addition in the back, right? So those things might be a process that they could go to a building board of appeals.
Great, thank you. We've asked several questions throughout, but Nicole?
You mentioned the 2015 IBC code. So Wisconsin decided not to adopt 2021, but when that does happen, I assume your staff has reviewed that. Are there any additional implications or, additional requirements beyond what's in here that would come with the 2021 IBC?
So the state of Wisconsin is on the 2015 IBC and the 2015 IFC. We were lucky enough that we have an ordinance in place that allowed us to get to the latest edition of the latest edition of the IFC. We can't get to the 21, we can't get the latest edition of the IBC, but we can get the latest edition of the IFC. And to answer your question, Nicole, that's where that classic instruction came from. That was actually added into the 2021 edition. That was not previously an option before.
Great, thanks.
One more question. Are there times when your firefighting technology advances and you can change some of the requirements because you now have this cool ladder that somehow can reach further at a different angle or something? Or do you have to wait for IBC generally to be updated because of something like that?
So we typically have to wait for the IBC to update, and I'll admit the fire service has not, as a whole, has not been as involved in the code development as they should be, because there are probably some things that we could do, but it's also probably the most important thing that we've struggled with is Wisconsin being so far behind in the building codes that they don't have the fire sprinkler, fire protection systems that most other states have been employing for the last 50 years, probably 75 years now, where Wisconsin's only been doing it for about 20 years. And I'll do a quick plug. We just did our annual report's getting ready to come out, but in 2023, the city of Madison experienced 11 fire sprinkler saves, which is like twice as many we've ever experienced, and that's a direct result of the building code finally changing in Wisconsin 20 years ago, and we're starting to reap that. That's huge. We hopefully will be able to then develop some data as this becomes more commonplace that maybe you're right, we don't need those fire lanes to the extent that we have historically been required in the code. But now that we're getting that, we're at our infancy in seeing those pluses from that.
Interesting, thanks.
Go ahead.
Keep it on this side. So kind of a different topic, electric vehicle charging. That's something that we're seeing a lot more, especially with the city's ordinance last year. So is there anything special in the fire code that's come about for that, or that?
Technology is still way too new on that. There's still significant debate among the fire service about how even to fight those fires. I don't know where it's going to go.
Commissioner McCahill, go ahead.
Thanks. So question about the authority on making these calls about what meets the code. You talked about lots of equivalencies and sort of things like trees need to be so far apart and stuff. Do those decisions ultimately lie with you, that like if you determine it's met, then it's met? Or are you accountable to like a state authority or something that could come in and say,
So it's probably a little bit of both. We do have some flexibility, so the code talks about allowing the local fire code official can modify some of those codes, kind of like when Matt had the segment up there about fire sprinklers. So that one we've done. We've taken the tree one and we're going to do it, and we'll see if the state comes back to us and says we can't do that anymore. So we've done that one was kind of more of we realize that we want trees, so we're not anti-tree. We just got to find that balance. And so that was one we've probably just done, and somebody else could probably be a little upset about that, but, we felt that was the right thing to do.
Thanks. Sounds like lots of codes work that way. Surface water until.
And I think that's I mentioned the Board of Appeals, and maybe we don't use it a lot for fire access lanes, but we use it a lot for a lot of other things in the code, because new technologies are coming out all the time, right? We're just talking about EV chargers. Building code doesn't address that yet. There might be other construction techniques that are coming out that never existed. The heavy timber, cross-laminated timber construction that was mentioned earlier for the Baker project off East Wash, that is not in the current building code. That is brand new technology that is being done. And Milwaukee had the first building, and they totally made down 100 variances, and they said they'll never do that process again, but they got the building built, right? And so we're learning constantly.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've read a little bit about building code or fire code requiring a second stairway being a challenge for some of the smaller scale multifamily developments. I can't say I've read that about specifically Wisconsin, but at least elsewhere. At what point is a second stairway required in the size or number of units of a building? And is that driven by the building code, the fire code, or something else?
It is driven by, the second exit is driven by the building code. Okay. There is an allowance for very small residential buildings to have a single exit stairway down. I want to say it's like a total of like 4 units, and then each unit has to be within 40 feet of that stair. So it's a pretty small building. We actually have a couple of them here in Madison, but that's driven on the building code.
Thank you.
On that same subject, I've seen on the always reliable social media channels that other cities do have taller single stairwell buildings. So they must have some way around the IBC.
I mean,
maybe 4 or 5 story.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple things might be, the IBC is a standard that's written and developed by professionals, and then that state or that community has to adopt it to make it enforceable. So in the state of Wisconsin, they have adopted the 2015 IBC. There is a neighboring state that does not have a statewide building code. Each municipality is still adopting whatever they want to adopt, to writing their own codes that they want to write. Most states, as a statewide, have gone away from that. Wisconsin and New York were the last 2 to write their own state code, but there are a handful of states that still allow the local municipality to pick and choose their own building code.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Any comments in general that anybody has? Okay, if not, then we'll say thank you for being here, and we will move on to our next topic. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time.
So our next item on the agenda is the demolition approval process. There are a couple of alders who have initiated this, and we want to take a look at it and see, as a plan commission, what thoughts we have about some of these ideas. And so, Heather, are you going to be sharing information with us, or? Pardon me?
I'm joining, but
Okay.
I'm going to take the lead.
Okay, very
I will
good.
leave the discussion here, but I'll ask my colleagues to join me at the table.
Okay, very good.
And
So I think everybody knows everybody, but why don't you go ahead and introduce, or each person can introduce themselves.
Heather Bailey, I'm the preservation planner for the city.
So Kate and Katie, you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Katie Bannon. I'm the zoning administrator at the city, so I work in the building inspection division, work closely with Kevin's team.
I'm Kate Smith. I'm the assistant city attorney responsible for you folks.
And again, I guess in the spirit of introductions, I'm Kevin Furco in the planning division. And I guess maybe we're a little delayed, but I wanted to wish all the plan commissioners a happy Pi Day before we get going here. And sorry, I did not bring, there are snacks back there.
Kate brought the pie.
Did you?
So thank you, Kate.
Did you? Oh, I didn't.
I had a piece. It's amazing.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't even realize up here at the front.
I know, I'm charming and multi-talented, so
I agree.
you're welcome all. Please eat some before I have to take it all home.
So, all right. Well, I want to jump right in. And as Chair Zellers had mentioned, late last year, a couple of alders approached staff from planning and zoning and the city attorney's office and asked ideas for potentially simplifying the demolition process. And so we've talking about that, and you had a work session shortly after, and one of the takeaways was, well, we didn't have time to get to it late last year, but when we got to the March work session, we were going to talk about it. So that's why we're here this evening, and to talk about some ideas, again, for discussion purposes tonight. And I guess I want to set some, just a little bit of table setting here. We want to talk in general concepts here, because I think there's some big policy questions, some big direction questions that we want to get feedback from the Plan Commission before we go too much further. So as far as tonight's overview, I just have a few slides, and I'd like to leave it conversational. I think my guess is as we get to certain slides, there's probably just questions and things we want to stop and chat through. So please just raise your hands, and let's keep it conversational and less lecture style. And similarly, if any of my colleagues want to add anything, please just jump right in. But as far as the item here, pretty simple. I want to talk a little bit, just do some table setting, talk about some recent development statistics, talk just a little bit about kind of how the demolition code has changed over the last couple of decades and kind of where we're at there. I'll summarize kind of where our process is. I think the Plan Commission is probably pretty familiar with the demolition process, but for those who may be tuning in or viewing this at another time, I want to do a little bit just overview of what the process is today. Then just talk about some potential ways that we could change the process, and then just open it up to feedback from that. So relatively simple agenda. And I think before we go any further, I think the Plan Commission is probably pretty familiar with the Landmarks Commission's role, but I think just for everybody here, I do want to talk a little bit about this. And there's a slide that provides us here a lot of text, so I'll just kind of quickly summarize. The role of the Landmarks Commission, they're an advisory body on every demolition of principal structures. So not for sheds or garages or accessory buildings, but for all accessory buildings. So for every demolition principal buildings. Thank you, Heather. They are advisory to the Plan Commission on all of the demolitions that you see. And the analogy that often comes up, it's often described as a stoplight, but there's a type A or a red light. That's when the when the Landmarks Commission finds that a structure is historically significant and has historic value. They have a middle of the road finding, or the yellow light. That's where they're urging caution that maybe the building is not historically significant, but there is historic value related to the site or the context. And oftentimes their recommendations would say something to the effect of, this is a regrettable loss, and they will have some information. So in many of the slides presented here, it's labeled, the shorthand is regrettable loss, but that's the middle of the road, the yellow light recommendation for landmarks. And then green light is when there's been a finding of no historic significance and no historic value.
So in the interest of having it more conversational, can we back up just a little bit? I mean, one of the things that seems to me to be very important in something that is as irrevocable as a demolition is to make sure that we have good communications. And I know that people can sign up for demolition application notification, and how is that triggered? Is it triggered on all demolition requests? And who initiates that?
Sure, and I actually have a slide that speaks to that a little bit later, but
good.
So okay. I can do I'm going to jump to it. The short version is that's a required notice for all demolitions that you see. That's a pre-application notice. So 30 days before an application is filed, this notification, there's 3 or 4 different notifications that happen. One is this online notification. that goes to an interested parties list for all demolitions.
Okay, so.
And that's initiated by the applicant, the owner, actually.
Okay, I may have a follow-up.
Yeah, and we can, I'll get to the slide on that, we can dig in.
You might talk about it later, but I want to get the question out now before I forget. So red light, the recommendation is we should not demolish the building because of something, or it would be a shame if it went away. Like I think some of us, and I know I am confused when I see that, like as red, like, oh, we shouldn't do it.
I think that, I'll let Heather speak to it because you grabbed the microphone, but essentially they're speaking, the Landmarks Commission is really only speaking to their comments on the historic value, and I think Heather could.
Yes, and so part of that way, the way we do this process at the moment is Landmarks Commission is simply tasked with providing guidance to the Plan Commission on the known historic value. So the big finding, or as I tend to call it, or the red light, is that this property has historic value, and then they say the reasons why. That doesn't necessarily mean don't demolish it, but they're wanting to communicate to you there is historic value. What you do with that, I think there's a whole wide range of things that you could do with that. So saying that there's a finding of historic value and the reasons why it is historic, certainly it could be don't tear it down, let's talk about some adaptive reuse. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. They're simply tasked with, is there known historic value?
Also,
Wait, I think he had a follow-up. Thank you.
So if something, let's say the state capitol was one, and we don't want to tear that down for whatever reason, right? Would that even come to us, or is that something like, because I think sometimes we get in these conversations and we get a lot of passionate feedback from the public that this building, whatever it is, should never be taken down because of X, Y, and Z. So I think that's where I'm kind of stuck at is, you know, better explanation or clarification on my side definitely would help.
Well, so I mean, if it's a principal structure, then yes.
I think the way it is today, though, it's Plan Commission's decision. So the Landmarks Commission is providing information for the Plan Commission to ultimately make a decision, because that's the Plan Commission's responsibility.
The only time Landmarks Commission is weighing in to say specifically whether or not you can demolish something is if it has a local historic designation, because then they're an approving entity. So this is advisory role on, they are tasked with being the managers of cultural resources for the city. And so they're presenting it to Plan Commission as part of your consideration for what needs to happen with this site.
Thank you.
That makes sense. So local historic district is different, right? Where we've locally designated an area, Landmarks Commission has a lot of additional powers in those areas, but citywide.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah.
Can I ask for a clarification? I think I understand this. In those situations that Landmarks is advisory to Plan Commission on demolition applications, they provide no information about what they think about the demolition, supposedly. It's all up to Plan Commission, right?
Generally speaking, there are some properties where we've been working, well, we as staff have been working with the applicants, and they're exploring some creative options for, I'm a big advocate for creative mitigation, and they're exploring some options. So then they will provide some additional information in what they send to the demolition listserv for, hey, we're talking about doing X, Y, and Z. And then Landmarks Commission might comment on, you know, there's ways in which you could commemorate the history, or what is significant about this building is the, you know, this particular ornament. And then something like Olive, where that project, they did some selective salvage, and then they did a recreation of some of the storefronts that had historic value. That way they were able to continue to convey those historic associations, but the project moved forward with a redevelopment of the project that still kept that flavor of Madison. But
Which
also
one
did some
project
evolution.
are you?
Olive on
Oh, right.
8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
With regards to the statistics, do you have it laid out where I see the 11%, 12%, 77%? Does it show the percentage of those different categories that actually did end up being demolished? Do you have those statistics?
Yeah, I can speak to that as far as, maybe I'll talk to the slide just a little bit here, but yes, it's the percentages here, it's a relatively small sample size, but the point in time we went back to is when the code changed back in the fall of 2021. There was a pretty substantial change to the demolition ordinance. So we're dealing with, roughly a year and a half's worth of demolitions and 92 demolitions. And since that time, and we went up to the end of last year, just so we weren't talking about any current applications. But in that roughly year and a half time frame, of the 92 that were proposed, 88 were approved. So 4 were not approved. And
Also, we don't necessarily have the information in here of how many that actually got demoed.
right, I guess yes, I think, but the short version is 3 of the 4 that were not approved, 3 had a red light or recommendation, and then 1 of them was withdrawn and then placed on file later by the Plan Commission. So I'm not sure that one had significance, but 3 of the 4 were in that historic value category. But just looking at this list here, just to build off this. Oh, I'm sorry, Alder, go ahead. Okay. As far as the numbers that we've seen, about 11% were in that historic value. When Landmark saw that, about 11% had that type A or red recommendation of historic value and significance. Another 12% were in that yellow, where they were found to not be historically significant themselves, but had historic value related to context or other considerations. And then 77% within this sample were in that green and no known historic value. And so a large percentage of the ones that we've seen were in that non-historic category.
Oh, no.
Okay.
My question passed already, so
I
want to go back to that topic.
Okay. All right, so any questions on just the general statistics here? We see roughly 50, give or take, demolition applications a year for the last several years. It's been around 50. And generally, of all the things the Plan Commission sees, it's roughly 200 applications, just to kind of put it in context of what the Plan Commission would see in it.
And I, speaking of statistics, I hope people had a chance to read the one public comment that we got in from Linda Leonards, where she put together some, I look at that and I go, how did you put together all that information? But, which I thought was kind of interesting in terms of which ones were conditional uses, the percentage that we would see anyway, which I hadn't actually kind of thought about that as something to look at. Yeah.
I'd comment on that in that, currently the way we handle demolitions is not in the same motion, at least, or agenda item as a conditional use request, but
at the same meeting.
It's related.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
I originally titled this slide Recent Demolition Process Modification, but I'm not sure if 1983 would qualify as recent, so I changed the title of the slide before we published it. But these are just some, I would say, big milestones in kind of changes in the demolition code. And going back to 1983, that was in the old zoning code, the structure that was relatively prevalent for up until a couple of years ago, where the Plan Commission reviewed both the demolition, that was one part of the question, and then also approving the proposed alternate use. And that goes back to at least 1983 in the old zoning code. Fast forwarding to about 2009, there was a subcommittee that spent many meetings, lots of time, and looked at changes to the old zoning code. Made some changes to the process. One of the changes, the word demolition was actually defined, and I think that definition is similar to what's in the code today. There were some other process changes that came through, including at one point, while we have a 30-day notice for conditional uses and all demolitions, in 2009, buildings built before 1940, I believe was the date, had a 60-day notification, so actually had a longer window. Most of those changes were carried forward in 2013 when the current zoning code was adopted. I think a few, including the 60-day notice, it was standardized back to the 30-day notice as it had been and as it is today. But largely, the other changes that came out of that subgroup in 2009 were rolled into the new zoning code in 2013. And then, as I mentioned, September 2021, the current code took effect. The main change there was removing the consideration, I shouldn't say the consideration, the approval of the future use. Where before a demolition, the Plan Commission is approving both the demolition and approving the future use based on guidance from the City Attorney's Office. There were legal concerns about the Plan Commission's ability to condition and approve a use, especially when it was a permitted use. So that was a significant change to the demolition process. Additionally, there were different standards that were approved as part of that rewrite, the ones that you see, every couple of weeks at a Plan Commission meeting. So that's really some key changes of the demolition process to date. So I want to talk just briefly, and this is where I think I can highlight to the chair's question about I'll try to elaborate a little bit about the pre-application notice, but this is a very simplified flow chart, but this is essentially the demo process that we have today and how it works. And I think in a typical case, oftentimes, planning and zoning staff will be the first stop. We'll get a phone call or an email, and somebody will talk to us about a proposal. And if it involves demolition, we'll talk about those steps. And if it involves conditional uses or other considerations, we'll talk about it. But after they talk with staff, we'll talk through the process. We'll talk about the pre-application notice. That's usually a big component. And again, the code says 30 days before filing an application, you need to provide certain notices. First notices is a written notice to the alder, then a written notice to a neighborhood association if it exists, written notice to a business association would be the other ones, and then there's this online notification. And what that does is people can sign up for the city, and I don't know the number offhand in terms of the number of recipients at this point, but the applicant will go in, they will fill out, and it's a pretty simple form, and it says, I'll be submitting an application to demolish a building at this address, and then they can provide a little bit of information, and then that gets forwarded out. And that's a pretty critical piece. I don't know, Liddell, first before I move on, was there anything else I could explain on that?
Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to say one thing here. So the only thing that's different about demolitions here is this demolition listserv. All other things that go to the Plan Commission also have these pre-application notices, the neighborhood association, business association, and alder, this pre-application notice, unless the alder waives it. So it's really that demolition listserv that makes it a little bit different than the other things you see. Yeah,
that's definitely an extra step in the process, although it kind of fits within the timeline in terms of it's the same pre-application time period.
And I don't know the origins of that. Is that to someone can save the building potentially? Why was that historically developed to have this listserv as well?
I think it was a heads up as far as for people, just another way to get the word out about demolitions. I don't know exactly in terms of the why it was, but I think it was a means to get the word out.
That's my understanding. I mean, because it's sometimes things are pretty hard to find out in the city that are going on, and this seemed like a good communication thing, the way I understand it. Yeah. Commissioner Mendez?
How do we know that's happened?
Well, as far as when it comes in, planning staff will get a notification, essentially an automated, once one comes in, and then planning staff basically sends it out to the listserv.
Plan Commission, how do we know all of those notifications have happened?
Well, it's I guess that's part of staff's just checklist. When we get a new, every 2 weeks, we have a new intake cycle. And of the checklist that we go through internally, we make sure that notice has come in. And if it hasn't come in, we will notify the potential applicant that we still need this notice, or the alder could waive that notice. That the alder has the ability to do that. And we actually spend quite a bit of time, going through each application, piece by piece. Sorry, and that's one of the pieces that we check for. And if we don't have a record of it, staff can go in and see when it was sent. And in fact, staff, when it comes in, staff sends it out. So staff is kind of the gatekeeper. Yeah. as far as when it comes in. So we can go in and verify that it's in, and if it's not in, we can't process it because they're required, it's an ordinance requirement that they do that.
So does the applicant get it sent out, or staff sends out the notification to the listserv people?
Or everything. I'm
Yep.
confused. I thought I heard two different.
Well, the applicant fills it out. So the applicant fills out the request, they hit submit, and then when they submit it, it comes to staff, and then staff essentially reviews it to make sure that we don't do any content control, but make sure that it's a legitimate request, or it's not some sort of spam kind of thing.
Or sometimes we get in, people file stuff for their garage, and we don't
That's
need
true.
to notify everybody about an accessory structure, so.
So we do a quality control check, and then we send it out to the list. So they apply, we're the gatekeepers, and once it's, deemed to be a valid request, we send it out usually within, right away. It's,
To the alder, to the listserv, to the business association, or
this is just a listserv. The other notifications all come in that for the other written notifications, that's the responsibility of the applicant to reach out to the alder, to the neighborhood association. To
that's the
business.
one I'm more interested in, and probably tangent to this one for a different discussion, but we've had some complaints that other like conditional uses or other projects never got communicated. So, and the applicant says they did, and the neighborhood, the alder or whoever say, and they never heard about the project until yesterday. So how do we know as a planning commission that yes, they sent the alder a notification, they sent the required folks the notifications, other than taking their word? So
they are required as part of their application to produce a copy of that notification. So as part of the checklist, when staff is
It's
reviewing
typically an email too.
Yeah.
And we're often even CC'd on it. So that's definitely something we're looking for.
Yeah, so if we don't see that, we can't book the application. Now, what happens with that application? I mean, there have been instances that it's come in and a meeting wasn't scheduled, or it was provided 30 days in advance and a meeting wasn't scheduled, or and that's happened at times, and we've had referrals requests because something has happened, but we cannot book the application until we have that we can check that box.
And just so people know, this is a subject of one of our future special meetings, is all the notifications. And so this will be a topic coming up at the recommendation of one of our members. And because we've had, a number of these kinds of questions come up. So we will have that as a topic.
A comment and a question, partially in response to Commissioner Mendez, but I would say, in my experience, especially in recent years, when alders think they didn't get notification, it's because they're not carefully managing their emails. But a question, alders can waive the 30-day time period, but not the notifications, correct?
Yes, the alder can waive the
Time period.
time frame, but we would still say that somebody would need to fill out the requirement. It might not need to be 30 days before they file, but staff would say you need to submit the form.
And it would still go to the listserv. And
Yes, because, and that's a good segue, because what's important about the way it works today, one of the key things that happens when that online notification is, that provides a cue to historic preservation staff to put this on the Landmarks Commission. So when the Landmarks Commission makes their advisory recommendation, that's based on that online notification being submitted. And so when that comes in, Landmarks Commission will put that on an upcoming meeting, usually a few weeks after that submittal comes in. That's an important, right now, I don't want to say automated because staff does it, but staff is the one that when they see those come in, though that is the point when they get scheduled for that Landmarks recommendation. So as part of the process then, oftentimes before the application is formally submitted, then Landmarks would make their red light, yellow light, green light, or type A, type B, type C recommendation.
So I have a couple questions. So I'm going to start from this and back my way out. So are you saying that if there's a demolition, we don't you guys do not notify us directly, the applicant does that?
It's the applicant's responsibility to notify the alder.
All right, maybe that's what it went down. Yeah, I registered for it, and then I start getting confused because I don't think that they have district numbers in it. And I'm like, okay, my whole district has been demolished, but then I realized they were not mine. So, so maybe perhaps part of the process, whenever we discuss that, is like how to make sure that alders are registered to that demolition thing instead of just waiting for the applicant to apply. For me, it works. Once I understood that they were not all mine, I got it. But I'm still confused a little bit, and this is something that we talked about with some people in planning for a blog that I put together on regards to the order, the flow for the things that are not landmark relevant. They still go in the agenda, right? But for the ones that are not landmark relevant, do you still have a public hearing, or do you just put that on the agenda and then have a discussion and then have a public hearing to have this the actual discussion? Like, how does that work out?
So at the end of every Landmarks Commission agenda,
I saw that.
this agenda item. And so it isn't legally a public hearing, but it's part of a public meeting. And so it's part of our published agenda, and part of that is supposed to be a public forum for, if there's, as a way to engage the public, if there's history about any of these properties that you want to come share. We don't always have the documented history on a particular property. And so we do a staff report for what we can find related to the history of a property and what may or may not be significant about it. But then it's out there for a general public, be they learned about it through the demolition listserv, and then they know that's going to be on a Landmarks Commission agenda, or they see the Landmarks agenda, and then they can show up and say, hey, did you know this happened here, or this is important in this way? So it is a way to then document what may or may not be significant about this property, capture that story, and then that can be a part of the communication from Landmarks Commission to the Plan Commission for, here's part of what we know about the historic value.
So does it come as an introduction kind of thing first, or is that meeting that you're going to say, they're here, I mean, I've seen the list, and you're going to approve them on that meeting, they're not, if nobody sees them or whatever, and you don't have any history, then they get approved right there as no history value? Not approved, but, pass whatever.
When it comes into the demolition listserv, okay, I've got an exception to this. I'm going to say, then we put it on the next available Landmarks Commission agenda. The only time I might put a pause on something is when it's something that needs a local historic, designation, therefore needs an approval. And then if it's something that I don't have an application for yet, I'll make sure that those things end up showing up on the same Landmarks Commission agenda. So if Landmarks is going to approve the demolition, then later on in the meeting, they'll do their historic value recommendation to Plan Commission.
Okay. That part was kind of fuzzy for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
A related question. Heather, if a building is not landmarked in any way and it's proposed for demolition, it goes out on the neighborhood listserv, but there's no public hearing, postcards wouldn't go out. And so it would really be only the alder of the district that would be notified about it by the applicant, and it's up to them to tell the neighbors somehow if the alder has a concern about a non-landmarked building.
Yes.
And it goes to the neighborhood associations and businesses.
Oh,
But yes,
good
today
point.
that's the process, right? It's
Okay.
because the public hearing is at Plan Commission.
So that's how people would learn about something. Okay, thank you.
Just
And so it's the responsibility of the applicant to reach out and prove that they reach out. We cannot delay the process because the elder is not responsive. Or is that, how does that work?
as far as if the applicant has taken all the steps and they have a complete application, then yes, we wouldn't have a reason to delay it. If there was I think we would try to encourage and work with an alder if they would agree to a referral for a couple of weeks to have some sort of meeting or outreach. But technically, once it's a complete application, if they've done the steps that they're required to, the Plan Commission could consider the item if they've done all the things that they're required to do. I did want to just note, the applicants are required to do the pre-application notice. There are a handful of notices that staff does. Once we have the applications, every 2 weeks, alders receive an email from planning that has the list of all the projects that are in the queue, so.
Yeah.
But that's not the pre-application, that's once they're in, so.
Right, but we do get some information from you. I was confused about that, yeah.
So, all right, any other questions on that? Otherwise, kind of back to kind of the process in this case, and it's gone through, Landmarks has made their recommendation here, and then the application would file, they would file their application, the 30 days has gone through, they file an application, we have our meeting, we make sure that it's complete, all the notices are in, we have all the required information, and roughly 6 weeks later from the application date, it's going to be 6 weeks to the public hearing where the Plan Commission would see it. And again, you would be the deciding body. You would have the recommendation from Landmarks, and typically our staff reports will link directly to the Landmarks report, and then the report that if staff had prepared a staff report that had some other background findings, you would have that along with the other required information. You would make your decision. If it's approved, then it would move to the final phase where they would go through sign-off, where there might be more detailed plans, there might be technical conditions that had to be found met. For example, a sewer service, a sewer plug would need to be issued. There's a lot of technical steps that need to happen after the Plan Commission approves it. But then at the end, the term raise permit is actually the permit that says it's okay to take down the structure. And that's what would happen at the end. And so that's the permitting phase. That's the final step after the Plan Commission would have approved it. So that's today's process. And are there just any other questions? Because then we'll kind of talk about how the process potentially could be revised. But I want to just pause there and see if there's anything on the current process.
Kevin, do you want to
Approve it, it gets signed off on, or it goes to Common Council?
Nope, demolition, the Plan Commission is the approving body on demolitions. Just like conditional uses, they don't go on to the Common Council. This is the deciding body, with the exception if there is an appeal. And then the decision of the Plan Commission could be appealed to the Common Council.
Kevin, do you want to just highlight the ones that are administrative, just in case?
Yes, there are, and it's on the one slide, but there are the 2021 code outlines 4 areas where demolitions of principal structures are not required to go through the Plan Commission. There's 4 limited exceptions. The first one is if there's a building that's damaged by fire or natural disaster, and the building inspector director can sign off on that demolition permit in those cases. Similarly, I think the building inspection director, if there's a finding of something that's not safe, something that's unsound, the building inspection director has the ability from a life safety standpoint to approve a demo. Demolitions that are approved in a campus master plan. So let's for example, the UW campus plan, I guess one that you'd be familiar with, that when that was approved, that master plan listed the several buildings that were approved for demolition. So in one way, it was a pre-approval, that as part of approval of the master plan, the Plan Commission was also approving of the structures that were designated on that plan for demolition. So those don't need to come back to the Plan Commission. There have been some from UW that were not included in their master plan, and so they had to go through the typical process and come back before Plan Commission. And then the other one for developments that are subsidized from the City of Madison for affordable housing units, there is also a caveat that those demolitions don't need to go to the Plan Commission.
And so those are enumerated in the ordinance, but all of those specifically enumerated categories, they still need a raise permit, right? They're still.
Yes, they still need the technical, yes, they need to go through the technical steps, but they wouldn't need to go through the Plan Commission, but they would need to meet all of the other technical requirements.
And would they, particularly that last one, go to Landmarks?
Well, so you mean the city subsidized affordable units?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe they would. That's a good question, because I think because the Landmarks, if that's because they're filling out the pre-Plan Commission notice, and that is the mechanism to get it before Landmarks. Let me double check, because I'm not sure, but I don't think it would be. I think part of the rationale here is When a development is receiving city funding, that's a council action. So the council is reviewing it at a high level in terms of being a funding partner of a development. So that was part of the rationale in terms of kind of the overall concept is something that the city council would be approving. So that was part of the rationale.
Having been in that higher body, I know that we didn't necessarily know, things about historic value or whatever. So it seems to me that it would make sense to at least provide the council with that information, even though it didn't have to go through Plan Commission. Just a thought.
Once the permit is approved, do you wait? How long does someone has to take this back to appeal the decision? Does people get to appeal the decision, and the ones that are administrative also?
Let's see. I'll look to Katie here. As far as I believe it's 10 days is the window for demolition, and the code specifies who has standing to make an appeal. And I believe. We have to verify, but I believe it would be the alder. I believe it would be the applicant. There may be, in that one, in some cases, you can appeal if you're in a certain geographic area, but yes.
But again, so do you wait then the 10 days to issue the
yes, we would,
approval before the appeal process?
Yes, we would not, if there was an appeal, we would not issue.
You wait, and then after the period is over, then you provide the permit.
And when is it that people within 200 feet are able to appeal?
We've been talking about this recently. So for Landmarks Commission decisions, but also for conditional uses.
Not
for Plan Commission, but demolitions, it's only the alder and the applicant that can appeal.
Thank you.
I
And
think there was a change in 2023 that took out the 200 person with the demo. Is that right?
demolitions.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And there's always a question about, for any appeal, but this one too, when does the clock start ticking?
It looks like it's at the Plan Commission's decision.
Okay.
The appeal is just of the Plan Commission decision.
Okay, got it.
So the date of the Plan Commission meeting. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the existing process? Or we can speak to how some ideas of, potential changes to the code here. And I think this is relatively simple in terms of the concept. I think that because historic value has been the big issue, big discussion point with demolitions. I guess if I was going to summarize the big change, essentially developments that were not found by the Landmarks Commission to have historic value, the green lights, the type C, the ones that have no historic value, those could go through an administrative process. And then the rest of the process other demolitions would go through essentially the same or a very similar process. So at a really high level, I want to kind of minimize the number of moving parts here for discussion purposes. But that's the big idea in this concept. So Landmarks would do their review, and if they said there was no known historic value, that would then start an administrative process for those demolitions. They would still need to meet all the technical regulations, do all the permitting. But then for ones where, and in this example here, the red light or the yellow light, the ones found to have historic value, significance, or have some sort of historic value, maybe the structure isn't, but based on its context, the yellow and the red, those would all go to the Plan Commission for consideration, and it would be a similar process to the one that you're quite familiar with.
And presumably, the notification would still go out, excuse me, on the listserv or whatever we're calling it, because as good as Landmarks is, occasionally one of their green lights is noticed by somebody that it's maybe shouldn't be a green light. So those notifications still would be going out. Is that what
they would go out before Landmarks Commission made its recommendation, because that's the going out to the listserv is what then triggers it to get placed on the Landmarks Commission agenda.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
And the alder, et cetera, would be notified as usual.
Okay.
I think that we're really, like, as Kevin said, kind of looking at this as a very high level conversation. So the feedback like more notifications or all of those things, like how you'd handle appeals for administrative. We really want thoughts and feedbacks for it. This isn't a situation where we have like a fully formed idea that we're coming to you with. We have had interest on changing some of the demolitions and moving some more things administratively, but we are so looking for all of your feedback on the types of things that we haven't thought about that would need to be put into really what would be a pretty large overhaul of a process. And a lot of it would be a big overhaul of processes that would happen internally with staff. So I think when you're in it, you forget a lot of the things that might need to be thought of. So notice all of that, all of those things. If we want to change it, we really are looking for all of your suggestions.
And in general, that's what these meetings
Yeah,
are for,
exactly.
is the discussion and general direction, but it would be iterative, essentially. I mean, the Plan Commission would definitely see things again. But to give general input.
I was going to apologize for our nerdiness. Our nerdiness.
You never have to
We like-
apologize for
we
nerdiness.
love it.
Dig in, yeah.
So, as you think about that, one other piece here, and I think there's another slide that we can dig in a little bit, but I think one of the ideas, again, Landmarks Commission, they would have, I think they would have largely the same role, but I think we're looking to add a little bit more shape to the Landmarks Commission role. One of the ideas, again, having a more formalized application process and submittal standards, so it's not so much based on, if you fill out the listserv, then you get on a Landmarks Commission, but make that process a little bit more deliberate, and give that a little bit more shape. I know we've talked about standardizing some of the submittal requirements in terms of data that the applicant could provide as part of their landmarks consideration. So we've got another slide, we can talk about that, but I think that would be, just one of the things that we thought we could standardize a little bit more than the process here, recognizing that Landmarks Commission is a very important part of the process and would continue to be in this option.
So do people have, I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Mendez.
So I was a question, since 88 or 77% would be going possibly straight through with the green lights.
Based on the number, based on that, it's, we'd have over 70% going through. Again, I don't know, that number could certainly change year to year, but at least in this last couple of years, we've had, quite a few green light demolitions.
So it would still go to landmarks and then go administrative. It just wouldn't come to you.
So question and a comment or consideration. So question would be, would the 10 days still apply for somebody to appeal that? So would it be from then the landmarks meeting that it would go through, so they can still go to the alder or to the applicant and say, or to alder, I guess, and say, you should appeal, we want to appeal this because we found it's historical, whatever reason, if it's green light and it went through.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, I guess.
Yeah, we would
thinking
need
about
to
that.
write an appeal process. So
But that's a
the
good
type
point.
of thing
That's what Linda, I think, in her message was talking about, was some of these things would just green light all the way through, and there was no kind of, whoa, hold on, type of safety net.
Because as it stands right now, there's no appeal of the Landmarks Commission. They're an advisory body along the way. You can appeal your decision, but Landmarks essentially is their advisory decision. So that would be something we would need to be worked into a revised process.
And then I think my consideration would be, is there a way to automate the process of the notification, at least to maybe the alder, maybe even the listserv, like when that application is filed, that it's automatically sent to the alder, so it takes a little bit off the applicant, but not that I'm making it easier for them, but just because of that large number, that we know it's going to the alder. So that way, it's getting there. If they read it or not, totally different story, but it's city sending it there. We know it's getting there. In this part, since we're streamlining it a little bit, I think
There might be some IT concerns about accessing, like, without having some sort of
Sign up on it.
like setup in there, but we could look into that.
I
But definitely from, I think that is again a given from from training processes, like that should be part of that package. We should have that information ready available. I mean, of course, when you first start, you don't know, there's so much information coming, but one of the things that we have been doing the past couple of years is that continue, picking up things. So this is something that I can definitely see, and if we're gonna have a meeting about the forms themselves, because I have plenty to say, but I'm gonna save it for that meeting, that will be a place that do that. There was something that didn't exist before, the land use, I think we used to, we didn't know those either because whatever, but now they gave us an actual, every week we get a table with all of them in there. So we can, this is something that I think the council office can actually handle instead of putting it on the listserv.
So in general, and knowing that there would be a lot more to be figured out on this, including the appeal process. In general, are people, commissioners, agreeable to the green light then being administratively handled?
Good.
I guess I'd like to go to the next slide because I like the green, but I also think that the yellow should be handled administratively.
The green is good.
Yeah, the green and yellow.
Okay, but I think we just agreed on the green, so.
Green. And that's,
Let's take a look
that's
at
why
this
it would have been
one.
nice
We'll
to have
see.
the next slide first.
I can put, and this was the alternate threshold. The only difference between these two concepts is what Alder Duncan was mentioning, and this would take that, let's say, for the batch we've looked at the last year and a half, another 12, those ones that landmarks had their middle of the road finding. This would also put those in administrative category here. So that's the real difference. It's a threshold. Keep bumping the microphone, I'm sorry. But that was a discussion point that we wanted feedback on of kind of, if you're comfortable with the concept and then where we should set the threshold.
Another thing that we can think about is, since this is a large overhaul of processes, like we could have a check-in in a year from now if you want to include yellow at that point, right? Like because we have to do so much on the front end, and really there's somewhat of a nominal amount of yellow flagged things. It can be something that you can work through once we actually get all of the infrastructure on the set up as checking back in to see how. I think it's good generally to check in to see how it's working. Is it working well? But that can, that can be something that we think about as well.
So, I mean, I'll be comfortable with the yellow on that context, like the infrastructure is already put in there to have an appeal for administrative task, to have something maybe in landmark to, that have all those safety nets. But I agree. I mean, I think start with the greens and then put the infrastructure in place and then revisit will be something that I support.
And I would wonder too, and this was something else that was brought up in that memo that we got, email, is there a bright line between the red and the yellow, which would be something then that perhaps landmarks could think more about too, going forward.
My inclination is not to include yellow, but certainly we could talk about it in a year and see how it's going. Some of it, I say that partially because I would want to understand the appeal process that we come up with, because I think that would be pretty important, because even this body disagrees about some of the yellow light recommendations that we've had about where they should go. And so I'd want to make sure we had a clear appeal process for that too.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
I was just going to chime in that I'm supportive of the green only at this point.
Okay, thank you.
My concern with the yellow right now is kind of what Patrick was talking about, is we've had a couple where we actually had the conversation with the developer during our meeting where we asked, well, we understand it's not significant, blah, 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 but could you add a plaque or could you incorporate the wall or something like that? So they went back and came back with a couple of those and said, yes, we can. Here's what we're going to do. And I think that was a good compromise. So if it was yellow, they may not have done any of that. And I think from kind of the historical preservation part for our stewardship of the city, that was a good thing for us, that we were able to at least get that in part of the development. So I would say no for the yellow right now, but open for discussion after.
Yeah, I think that the Dayton Street one was a good one that I think many people were on the commission then that I think had a really good outcome that was a yellow. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm pretty comfortable with green. I think on the point about yellow, I'd want to better understand where the line is between yellow and red designations and how the discussion usually looks when the Landmarks Commission is going to make that determination. Just thinking about incentives, right? If we're setting up a process downstream based on that decision. And then in either of these scenarios, I'm wondering about how long it would take to implement the process changes that this would entail. How long would it take before this is in effect? Assuming we like what you bring back.
I think we're talking a fairly. It's a lot. We also have to work out like things with IT and it could.
So I mean, if we're, one of the answers here could be just about how long would it take for a text amendment to get introduced and then us to implement?
Well, a text amendment that I think will have people with opinions and probably, I mean, if it, I would say something like this, I would think 2 months because I think there will be public comment, there could be referrals to subcommittees. So I don't think it would be faster. I mean, that's a fast track for kind of a controversial, like a text amendment. So I would say probably 3 months, something like this. That was a big change. And I'm also assuming that there would be, even before it's introduced, you know, reaching out to the business community, to historic preservation. Like there's a fair amount of community engagement that would happen with this as well. So, you know, I think probably all of that, you're probably talking by, you know, 6 months maybe.
I was gonna chime in at least, 6 months in terms of that. But I think what we could offer is there's a lot of things we need to look at and put some more shape to. But we could report back to the Plan Commission in 3 months at a secretary's report or put an item on and just report progress of where we're at and what we're finding. And we could certainly maybe don't need to do it at a special meeting. We can just take a couple minutes at a regular meeting, in let's say July or
Yeah, good.
Now, to answer the first part of your question, though, about where's the line between our big finding and our middle of the road finding, I'm going to start with the middle of the road. So Landmarks Commission usually talks about it's significant as part of the vernacular context of Madison, meaning it's been part of the city's landscape for a while. But the structure is not itself historically, culturally, or architecturally significant. And so they're saying, there's a story here for whatever significant reason, and they'll say why, but this thing itself is not necessarily significant, and therefore that's what we classify as regrettable loss. For our big findings, it's no, this building is historically or culturally or architecturally significant, and then they'll say the reasons why. And so they'll say, this place is able to convey its significance, tell its story. Whereas the other place, there's a larger context here. A lot of times Landmarks Commission is wanting to sort of shout to the void of, this is a type of resource that we're losing a lot of. And so for preservation planning purposes, maybe we need to start thinking about, hey, are we getting to the point of saying these are rare remaining resources? And maybe we want to think about this, but also to communicate to our long range planners as they're doing area planning of, hey, we're starting to lose resources like this. We've also started doing what we're calling our modified known historic value. The way that we protect archaeological sites across the nation is to restrict information about them so that people don't go out and loot them, because we have a long history of going out and looting them. But what that has resulted in is erasure of Native American history. Madison is covered in archaeological sites, in human burial sites, some of which that are still intact, many that we have long since desecrated. I've got that information, and what we had done in the past was we would, as part of our process, put in to make sure that the folks who are doing the ground disturbing work, that they need to go to the state archaeologist to get what they call a request to disturb, as to comply with state burial law. what Landmarks Commission has started to do is include in their statements of, the structure itself, not historically or architecturally significant, but this is on the site of, whatever the name is, and we'll include there's a burial designation, and it is significant to the Ho-Chunk people. So we're starting to put that on the record. It's a sort of bureaucratic little bit of comfort to put out there so that we are starting to document all of the places in the city where there is a Native American cultural connection here and putting that into the record, because we have done such a job of not including that in the record up to this point.
Associated with that, we had a report done like 3 years ago, maybe, underrepresented groups and communities and sites that might be significant for those various groups of people. How is that handled by Landmarks Commission in terms of red, yellow, green?
That is part of the information that staff uses as part of compiling their staff report. As part of doing that survey, we submitted that information to the state, so it is included in the AHI, Architecture and History Inventory, the ASI, Archaeological Site Inventory. So all that information is out there with the state as part of the documentation. So when we then pull together our information, that is a resource that we pull from. And so there have been some things like the Olive on State Street, where we said these were properties that were recently identified. Well, there's one that was recently identified as part of the Underrepresented Community Resources Survey. And so that will show up in the staff report, and then it's part of the Landmarks Commission discussion.
Very good, thank you. Yeah.
Question about that, actually, if for one of those situations, and given the Landmarks current policy, could you red light a place like that, or does it have, I thought those were just for landmarked or in a local historic district. I was thinking a site like, the Clarenbach house that's recently been landmarked. Before that, could you give that a red because it wasn't landmarked?
Well, so actually that one, if somebody had come in for a demo request, that would have been a big finding because it's contributing to the West Lawn Heights National Register.
Oh, okay. So but let's say the site that important in the Black community, but is not in a historic district at all.
And doesn't have an existing historic designation.
Yeah. Could that be a red light?
It could be. Okay. That would be up to the purview of the Landmarks Commission for them to make a decision about. So with the Olive, the development, the one property that they ended up doing their regrettable loss finding on, there was the former pharmacy that had been significant to the LGBTQIA plus community because of their AIDS education and outreach. And they were waffling on that it was a more recent past thing, and so they wanted to convey the history of it, but not say that the structure itself was necessarily, now I'm doing it. It was not necessarily historically significant, but that it was a way to share that story.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I just note, earlier question, I think this highlighted some of this question of the line between a yellow and a red and some of the crossover. And it was noted in one of the comments that came in earlier. I think one of the things we've been talking about as an ordinance could be structured would be to define what is a type A or a red, what is a yellow. And I think that would be an important addition to the code too. So right now it's policy and practice, but I think to have a code, so there's I guess a clearer understanding of what that recommendation means.
Right now, our recommendation is in the Landmarks Commission Policy Manual, and that was developed a while ago, that language, more than 10 years ago, in collaboration between the Landmarks Commission and the Plan Commission. But just because it's been in place, that doesn't mean we can't update it.
Yeah, I think the standards right now are so subjective as opposed to being objective and just laying out direct points of how and what you can do, that this body here, the next body may think completely different.
Yes.
By reading the standards because they are so subjective.
Now, On that front, though, just to be a downer, it is always going to be subjective. And it's about a decision about what we value. Yes, there is a technical process for how Landmarks Commission evaluates what we consider historically or culturally or architecturally significant. And they have a lot of experience with that, and they have expertise, and they can go through their review process. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a decision about what we as a city are deciding that we want to value and want to continue to have integrated into our identity as Madison. So it is a value decision. It would be, on the one hand, easier if we could make it into a totally black and white situation where we say, here's our criteria and you do or you don't, and, the end. But for particularly these ones where we're saying they're really significant, it's going to be a struggle. And I don't think there's any way around that. And we have to decide what way we want our city to evolve and take shape. And it's likely not necessarily going to be an easy decision. It's a value choice.
And the other thing, I agree with that. I think it's a little squishy, to the extent we can define it, great, but I think there's always going to be things that people need to talk about and make a decision on. The other thing that I have seen throughout my history with the city are things that maybe as good as Landmarks is, that for whatever reason, the information isn't right at hand. And people then do raise things, even on green-lighted things, after the fact, when they find out about them. So we're always going to have these, I think, kind of rough edges. And to the extent we can smooth those off, great. But I think we aren't ever going to be kind of perfect in how we do it. So
I'd add, it's true with Plan Commission too. There is subjectivity in our standards of approval for a good reason. And if it did just take a rubric, each Plan Commission meeting would be 20 minutes long and we'd have nothing to discuss.
could just do it.
That would be good in some sense.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? I don't see a problem here.
I have a sort of cynical perspective on this that I'm thinking through with yellow being administrative, which is, in my view, the Landmarks role is to preserve buildings that it deems important. And then when those come to Plan Commission, the role is to weigh that with lots of other things. And so to me, it depends a lot on what that administrative process looks like, because if folks in Landmark Commission see that sending something to Plan Commission opens up more opportunities for the building to be torn down, there's sort of like a human incentive to say, depending on what the administrative process looks like, let's call it yellow and not introduce all these other, factors that Plan Commission is going to wrestle with. So I wonder what that yellow light administrative process looks like, and how that influences Landmark decisions.
So yellow would mean that it's going to get approved, right? Technically, it would run through administratively as approved.
Green.
Green, but I'm saying in this one, if we added yellow would automatically get approved. It did have the whatever appeal process, but it wouldn't necessarily have the discussion portion of it that I think we're talking about.
It would just be demoed.
Yeah.
Oh, so yellow and
what we're
green
saying
are
there.
the same in this case.
On that slide.
Two options, so.
In the second option, yellow and green would both be administrative, and red would be the only ones that this body would see. But my understanding, based on the earlier discussion, is we're going to start just with green, and then we'll check in after a year to see, see how we're feeling about it, I think was my takeaway on that part of the discussion.
Yes, that's what I heard too. Yeah.
But we have any cases where the administrative ones that you do today are not approved?
As far as the administrative ones, there's very few. We're talking about natural disasters. I'm not sure of, and fire, and so it's a very small number.
The few that we've had have been, because it's a public safety situation, and I write my little thing to say, what the historic value thing is, because they need to immediately take it down, because some kind of major structural failure, fire, something like that.
And the administrative review ones just went in when you guys did the overhaul of
21.
the demo, right? So that's relatively new.
There haven't been a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only think of 1 or 2 maybe.
I want to say it's been 3.
Yeah.
Kevin, could I, because I want to be mindful of the time, as I know that Chair Saller's often,
Because we've got, as far as I'm concerned, 6 more minutes on this topic.
Yes. Could I get some very quick feedback on this idea of having some of the standards be part of the administrative? Because when we're talking about, so right now, since we're talking about a blank slate for what we would do for our demolition ordinance, many of the approval standards that you currently have listed are things like have an approved reuse and recycling plan or other things that I think we were when we're thinking about redoing this and have gotten some feedback from commissioners and alders that it seems that these are things that could be more part of the staff review as a check box and not a standard that comes in front of you. Kevin, do you have the list of all of the standards?
Yeah,
that was a slide.
This is the one, those are the 7 that we have today.
Yeah, so obviously not, this doesn't apply to all of them, but if we wanted to have less standards, all of these things would still need to be presented to staff. Some of them also you have to get the raise permit. Like it's not like you can just push your way through without having many of these. But if you are trying to have a discussion on what the approval standards should be, do you find it helpful to have this many? Would you find it helpful to have them, have less of them, maybe more targeted towards the type of information that you need in front of you to approve? You can also ruminate on this on your own and email us later, since there's, I think, maybe now 3 minutes on this. But the idea being, if we are writing this from scratch, are there some things here that you don't think should be a standard, but should be part of the application, right? Like the things that just staff can check out on their own to make sure that they've turned in.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
And maybe other staff, in our reports that we get from staff for a demolition application, and usually there are conditions of approval even for a demolition application, and I don't care, and my thought is I don't care if most of this is a standard as long as important things appear as conditions of approval that's before us as we're considering the application, and that any non-standard conditions of approval are highlighted. I don't care one way or the other whether it's in the ordinance or not,
I would agree, actually, with that.
I mean, some of this stuff is fascinating. I'm sorry to drift a little bit, but for instance, for one particular thing when I was alder, I ended up talking at great length with the person that understands everything about the recycling plans, who's in streets, I guess. And it was fascinating, and so I'm kind of hesitant because I really think this stuff is interesting, but most people probably don't.
So what I would do, considering that we really don't have any more time, is think about this. And if you've got ideas about it, we will revisit it, or if you've got strong feelings or whatever, then let me know and we can compile and at least loop back then.
I like the concept.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd really love is if you're like, oh no, we need to keep this one in, because we're bringing this to you because as staff, we're like, oh yeah, of course we're going to look for a certificate of appropriateness. There's no reason that we need to make it a standard that Planning Commission needs to look at, but maybe there's some that you're like, woo, actually you're missing something, staff. Let us know, please.
well,
I guess with regards to the bullet that you have on the additional standard that y'all are looking at possibly having, is there time, I guess, to discuss that here, or is that just going to move forward?
it will, and without further discussion, I'm not sure that it's going to go forward. But if we're going to get to the northeast area plan, I think we really do need to move on. But feel free to let me know if you have strong feelings about this, because it's not a vote. So if you do have feelings about it, we can certainly feed that back to staff.
And I would consider this something we can revisit in a couple of months when we check back in. But if you have comments, send it to the chair and send it to staff, and we can chew on it and kind of report back of what, I don't think we can put pause on that part of the discussion and pick it up next time.
Okay, with that, thank you all very much. Thank you, Kevin. So moving on, then we will go to, I think, Dan McAuliffe, you're going to be leading off on this? Okay.
So,
And so if you'll both introduce yourself then.
got a new cell phone for the house, and my kids loved picking out the ringer. That was like an hour of entertainment.
Okay, please go ahead, introduce yourselves, and let's get going.
All right. Hello, my name is Dan McAuliffe with Kirsty Latch. We are some of the project planners for the Northeast Area Plan. I very much hope not to take the whole hour. I want to be respectful of your time, but we did say we'd come back and ask for a couple things after our follow-up meeting. So just kind of getting started. Quick recap. We've done a couple of land use updates, relatively minor, but we really just kind of bring those to the attention of the PC while we're here. But last time we needed, before, kind of the reason for why we're here today is we had some questions related to height that we needed answers. We were waiting for information from Dane County Regional Airport in relation to their height limits. We had some direction to kind of explore some official mapping. We have some couple ideas that we'd like to run past the PC. And then we hadn't yet discussed proactive rezonings that could occur as part of this process of the follow-up. So a lot of our land use updates are related to how we should handle park spaces in the area. So the Greater Easttown area plan, as well as the Odana area plans, did not really utilize specific park spaces as part of their generalized future land use plan. The idea was that The idea was that there's a lot of uncertainty in these redeveloping areas, and we can't fully predict exactly where the park's going to go. Very, very true. I think what we've learned since then is there's some drawbacks to this. Mainly that, when there's some ambiguity about where the park spaces go, many times the property owners, developers are all going to point at the other one and say, oh, no, the park's going to go over there. I'm going to get all the development. So there's that. It also makes it more difficult for us to compel parkland dedication as part of our normal processes. And lastly, if we choose to acquire properties, we've essentially increased the value by effectively, increasing the allowable use in the future. Allowable use increases the property. We're basically bidding against ourselves. So that resulted in just a slight change in philosophies. So here's kind of some of those land uses. So the three areas, these have transitioned from just those generalized park areas to more park space on the generalized future land use. So this is the area south of, let me pull up the laser pointer, kind of south of Easttown, the current woodland wetted area south. We have a mid-block park This is the commercial block with the Princeton Club, as well as the Czech store. Rogan Shoes is kind of right here as well, along the future extension of High Crossing, and then the expansion of Mayfair Park on Sycamore and Mendota Street. We still have a couple generalized park areas. We kind of took a look at those. There really wasn't any clear way of how to handle those based on the platting. So those are on the kind of the big box land at the current extension at the terminus of High Point or High Crossing, as well as the public plaza that is envisioned as the extension of Independence through there. Last two, we've added 2 generalized park areas. These are some parks where there's a clear need. We've heard from our partners in the Parks Division that they'd like to have either a new park or an expanded park in those areas, but there's some uncertainty and lack of clear options as to where those. So those are kind of those updates. We have a couple other just kind of, I would say, kind of cleanup. This is a transition from community mixed use to regional mixed use. That's really reflecting the current zoning when we kind of got through the zoning and land use analysis. It's RMX right now, so it allows by right heights greater than what is allowable in CMU. So kind of bringing that up to meet that change as well. There is a transition from community mixed use to commercial. So this is on kind of in the depth of the target parcel. That had transitioned from commercial to community mixed use during the Greater East Town. And what kind of a revised analysis of that site is really in the depth of the site, at the very back. We didn't see how residential would work kind of in the near term, maybe in the very long term when there's better connections. But it kind of in the more immediate term, it definitely seemed kind of challenging and problematic from a residential perspective. We absolutely think the frontage along Lean Road where we have transit, still very appropriate for mixed use development, but kind of way in the back of the site by in the disconnected area by kind of the wetlands and the industrial areas, it just seemed very challenging. So we're recommending transitioning that. Along with that, kind of as we shift our philosophies from commercial, where we're thinking those as exclusively commercial and non-residential uses, we evaluated the triangle at Lean and Thompson. So this is where the current Quick Trip is. Also, I believe there's a small kind of warehouse. When we kind of looked at the surrounding, when we see the transition from a lot of those adjacent areas to park, its proximity to the residential, it no longer seemed like an area where you want to prevent residential from occurring, hence the transition to a recommended change to mixed use. Moving into the height. So,
hold on. Why don't we, in the interest of doing it while it's fresh in our minds, what about these land use changes? What's the reaction? What's your questions about them? Do they look good?
So the red one there in that, so are we proposing more residential there or not?
I'm sorry?
Are you proposing more density there?
No,
Okay.
no. So what we're actually, you're trying to draw back the areas of residential, of future residential to areas where it's most appropriate. So instead of allowing residential at the back, as would currently be the case under the community mixed use, we just think that residential at the frontage, kind of where those more strip commercial properties are right at the edge, really makes a lot of sense. That's an area that we think makes sense to transition over time. But in the depth of the property, where we looked for a potential street network, it seems very challenging. There's not going to be a lot of connections, either in the short term or in the long term. And the proximity of other kind of industrial uses that make sense, it just seemed very challenging.
So the red would be general commercial then, as opposed to...
The proximity to the park. 'Cause I know that there's also some kind of rules about, it almost feels like you're building in the park, even though you're not.
Oh, yeah. So this is, behind there is not actually a park. It's
What
a
is
large
that?
kind of wetland complex.
Oh, okay, got it.
Industrial uses.
It's a stormwater.
Got it. Okay, that's what I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's kind of right on top of the park. That's weird.
Dan, in these particular land use changes are without regard to what's there now, right?
Yes, so we're more thinking about the future use while we always kind of factor in kind of what's there now. I think when we think about our future land uses is really kind of what we'd be comfortable approving in the future, not kind of what is there exactly.
Yeah, I don't have any other questions.
Any other questions or input about these land use items? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to chime in, I think these all make sense to me. I've had a chance to review the changes, and additional park space makes a lot of sense farther from where other parks are located, especially given the density of uses nearby. The shift from mixed use to commercial in one spot and then down the road, commercial to mixed use in the other spot, knowing more about the local context there and the disconnection of that circled parcel, that I am supportive.
Other people? Yes, okay.
I was going to say that I honestly, I don't feel equipped to critique the park locations. Sure, if Parks thinks that's a great idea and adding the new areas that are approximate, why not?
We have had those conversations with Parks. I think one of the big lessons learned is Parks has a good idea where they generally see the need and want it. They don't necessarily have a full understanding of the metrics of how land becomes future parkland. They understand there's a dedication, they understand they can buy it, but how that all works together in a development process and how we shape our plans to get them the parkland that they want in the locations, that's not their area of expertise. That's kind of what we do. So
I appreciate that you're saying it's not just Parks recommending these, you all interact with them. And
very much so.
Yeah.
I would just add in, I mean, my only concern or question is the park that's in the middle of the parcel that you mentioned where Princeton Club is. It just seems to kind of be breaking up what is a otherwise pretty developable parcel.
Sure.
It's kind of like right in the middle of it. I understand that the other park green space around it is not really usable park space, hence the need for it, but I would consider some flexibility on where that lies and that, you know, like what are you doing around that park space?
Great point. And so we always think about the land use lines on our map as relatively flexible. I think part of the thought about, and it's interesting because we would historically say, you know, we don't want a mid-block park. We're hoping that we get, you know, with the extension of High Crossing, that puts some street frontage. And I think there's might be some opportunity to nudge that. But what that kind of does is get in the middle of the property. It gives us, say, we can grab from this property if it redevelops to grab there. The more properties we touch with a GFLU of a park, the more we can seek dedication from. So it doesn't put it all, it kind of shares the burden of the park space more effectively. So we can look at nudging that possibly to give it more street frontage. That's something that we can do. But your point's very well taken. There's ways that we can adjust that to kind of maximize the development potential of those sites. We can take a look at that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or observations or direction to give staff on these? Okay, so in general, it looks like.
Good. Yeah, our hope was those weren't significant, but just wanted to run through. So the height, so this was a pretty unique process because the entire area is under the airport height limits. So sometimes we looked at, you know, kind of the building heights that we think are achievable, particularly on our bus rapid transit corridor that we like to see. Those are in direct conflict of what we can actually allow to occur. So this map is your legal maximum of building height. And what I mean by building height is the tallest thing on the building, which is different from how we measured in zoning, which is usually up to the top floor. So things like parapet, mechanical equipment, elevator, penthouse, antennas, all that stuff needs to fall below the airport height limit. They're pretty strict about it. And there is a variance process. The intent that we got was the airport has really, that's not something they want to do. So right now, the next map kind of shows you if we translate that into stories. So we used the downtown height, or the downtown section of the code, the zoning codes, maximum floor-to-floor height. So those are relatively tall, floor-to-floor. Some of that does give us a little capacity for those rooftop mechanicals, elevator, penthouse. It might also allow a little extra capacity, but we're, you know, kind of the area that has the highest capacity is actually kind of where we kind of saw some of the most appropriate locations for the lower intensity residential uses. You know, we always try to locate our highest intensity uses next to our highest intensity transit. Makes a lot of sense. In this case, it's actually the legal allowable is a different story. We have the highest allowable use. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the wisest, but it is someplace that we could allow.
What are those little white islands?
Over here?
No. Down on the lower right.
Right here?
There, yeah.
That is where we allow less than a 3-story max.
And why is that right there?
That's a hill.
Okay, that's what I
So,
wondered.
yeah, so this is so because this is factoring in a ground level elevation and a maximum ceiling height, it's going to be variable. And they're almost like tiles, right? So you have a square that might be, you're allowed to build to 1,000 feet over sea level. We have a 892 elevation, it's math at a certain point. And so it makes for a very odd map, which is why you see all the different colors, but we're trying to show that. So where we have high levels, for example, in Sandbird Park, low buildings, where we have low land, we have high. The further away you get away from the airport, obviously the higher it goes as well.
We getting away from the airport, but we getting towards the interstate. So is that meant for like any kind of height, like housing or the employment or what?
This is not to say this is the height we're recommending. This is the highest we could recommend.
Because of the airport, you said?
Because of the airport.
Okay, good. That's a good distinction to make. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No,
So
it's okay.
that's not to say, again, so this is when we think about the maximum heights we would want to allow is we have to factor in where we think those tall uses make sense. So what we ended up doing, these are kind of the heights that we ended up recommending. So the red numbers are actually heights that are right up against the airport height limits. So again, because we have some relatively high floor-to-floor assumptions, there might be a little bit of wiggle room, but you might be able to get a floor to max more out of that. That's kind of where we're comfortable. We're saying that is the airport height limit. That's not our height limit. These are generally in alignment with, they're similar to what was within the Greater Easttown Plan. The black numbers are numbers that kind of where we were not in the greater, they're heights underneath the airport height limit for our land uses that don't have height guidance. So, and just to clarify a little bit, we are really leaning on our land use designations for the vast majority of the heights, but there are certain land uses that don't have any height guidance or say allowable higher elevations by the underlying plan. So our real focus on this is our regional mixed use, our general commercial, and our employment land uses. The balance of those do have the height guidance by the underlying land use. So for example, the community mixed use here, we're not showing that. That's a 6-story recommendation. The low medium residential right here, that's a 3-story recommendation. So in general, most of the area, we are kind of maxing it out at those height limits. The balance is really those commercial and employment areas. Mostly those are 5 or 6 stories. There's a couple 8 along by the highway. Again, that is for commercial employment predominantly.
I have a quick question. So is the intention with this to actually include these height limits in the plan, or rather to map this to then rely on the underlying land use categories that you mentioned that have height limits and just include them for the categories that don't have height limits? That was a rambling question. I hope you got it.
No, I got it. Yeah. So our intent is to provide more clear height guidance across the board.
Thank you.
And our focus has been on those land uses that don't have that height guidance. So, it's not our intent to show, we don't want to put a height number on low, medium residential, for example, where we already have clear text guidance in the comp plan that says 3, maybe in some cases 4. So we're trying to just make it as simple as possible. So,
And Dan, what you're thinking about is only for this area.
That's correct. So our long term, is because these are part of a citywide puzzle, is to kind of have this greater predictability about heights across the city. So this is just for this area.
And because topography is different.
Yep. This area is unique because of the airport. We run into some different things There's a little bit of airport influence in the west area, but not quite as this. So the north area plan, which is coming up not this year, but I guess hopefully maybe in getting off the ground in 25, that will have that as well. The southeast area might have it, but probably less than that. The airport height limitations go pretty far. It's about a 3-mile buffer from the airport. Not a ton to react to because we're not actually making too many recommendations in this point. More just being clear about what those height limits are.
I wanted to raise one suggestion, though, on this map. So the area that you had highlighted as low, medium residential that would be a higher allowance under the airport height limit. I understand that this is from the Easttown plan. Given the reduction, kind of the hard limit in the other nearby areas, I'm kind of thinking we should reconsider the low, medium residential in this kind of lobe of the Easttown area. And before raising this tonight, I did chat with the District 17 alder who said that she wouldn't oppose that if we wanted to go that way.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I think there's different thoughts, and I don't know if anyone is wrong, right? We certainly see a citywide need for that missing middle housing, and we don't want to take that away. Totally also understand the other point. This is a dramatically redeveloping area. Property values are already going to be high. There's going to be market pressures.
So I didn't catch, were you suggesting that low, medium residential be bumped up to medium?
Yes.
Is that, okay, thank you.
That's a great question for the Plan Commission. Anybody? If anybody has...
Yes, we're increasing density, right?
Whose alder district is that?
Sabrina Madison's.
Okay.
And so I did touch base with her a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to make sure I wouldn't be inconsistent with her vision of the area if I raised this tonight.
So just for clarification, so everybody's familiar, this is about the old Menards, the current Union School. This is kind of in the Joann Fabrics, TJ Maxx, PetSmart, Old Navy area of big box, what I lovingly call big box land at Easttown.
Mm-hmm. So, is that a vote that we take here, or is that something that can be an amendment that the alder and?
We can
do it
if
here.
it's the will of the Plan Commission, we can incorporate that into our plan moving forward.
And hopefully, the alders that are representing the areas in this plan and in the West Area plan are really engaged, both with what's going on here and with their residents, so that it all comes together without too much concern in the final analysis. So it makes sense to me, what you're suggesting.
So,
well, that's like Dan said, this is something that staff has kind of gone back and forth with ourselves. So that's why we were hoping to get some direction. But, one of the reason that the recommendation is currently the way it is because we keep talking about more missing middle, and this seems like a broad opportunity with the redevelopment of this area, but for the reason you were just talking about with, this area could have a little more capacity. We're kind of, we're just debating around and around kind of as staff of where it should land. So that's why we were.
Another question. Could these areas go higher with the additional use in this area?
There's no reason why they couldn't. I guess one suggestion I would make, if it's Plan Commission's will that these go to medium residential, I would actually suggest that they transition to a community mixed use rather than an exclusively residential district. They very likely would transition, but if you think about proactively rezoning the areas, there's not, and that's actually something we'll get to, there's not a clear way to proactively rezone properties into exclusively residential districts while not creating non-conforming uses. If that's something to consider moving forward, even at a mixed use, you're going to have the vast majority of new development be residential. You might be talking about a limited ground floor. I think it works better for some of the existing uses, like some of those training facilities. Maybe it becomes a greater focus on employment. We don't know. But if the will is already to increase the allowable intensity, I would suggest changing it to a mixed use designation.
So then my follow-up would be, why don't we just give them the max height by right in these areas instead of, well, we're going to say 8, but you can go up to 12 or whatever.
That's almost like a perfect transition into, there's reasons I think we want to be a little cautious with by right. Not because we want to get an over-regulation, but we lose some ability for things within the plan.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in and say that because this was all so discussed and planned, the relationships of land uses and the scale and massing as a whole during the Greater Easttown Area Plan. And so this planning effort really used that as the basis, but as you can tell, tweaked a few things. To address some issues maybe that have kind of evolved since then. And so what we're trying to do, really, simplest terms, create a whole complete, vibrant destination neighborhood here with a lot of different types of housing choices and a lot of different types of activities and commercial uses, and not just have it all be one thing. And, it's pretty much a single-use district now, so we didn't want to just trade in single-use, commercial only, basically, district for just residential only. And, one type of residential. So there's a lot behind this. It's not just land use, switch it to this category or that category, and it's not just height, switch it to this or that. I mean, it kind of is, but if you push the balloon here, then it pops out somewhere else. So our goal is to have the ultimate redevelopment of this area to be one of those great special places in Madison. And not just let the future of it be decided on a parcel by parcel development, really have the vision for what this is going to be. And that's what we're trying to translate into the land use and heights and other recommendations in the map. So all same discussions that we have as staff. So all great points.
Yeah, and I'd also say that there's so many different trade-offs that we could discuss. And Bill mentioned that we wanted to set aside a different housing type, which is why we set aside a larger area for low-medium residential. And at the time, we didn't have such detailed data about the airport height limits. So perhaps it would make sense that the low-medium residential area could be shifted to a different area that has less height capacity. But overall, I think people do want missing middle housing, and it's difficult to get it if we don't reserve areas for it. So just one of the trade-offs to consider.
So just jumping back to, this map is probably the best to look at actual height capacity. So kind of in that area, we do have, it's up to, I made this map too small. Yeah, so kind of in that, this is kind of wetland, so this is all developed anyways down here, but you're kind of in the 13 to 12 story capacity at that southern side. Again, it is quite a ways from our BRT. I think that, you're outside that quarter-mile walk shed that we would anticipate is generating those users. So I think that gives me a little caution about throwing a ton of intensity right there. If there is the perspective of maxing out the intensity, maybe it might be more appropriate to leave that. Let's jump back here. So leaving this area as community mixed use and transitioning the areas closer to the BRT station to regional mixed use. That would still fall in that 10-story height capacity. You get some there, but then kind of have that lower scale further away.
The thoughts about that?
Do you have a map that shows the TOD overlay?
This,
area in the overlay?
I believe it's in our zoning map,
There.
which is not legible. My apologies. It's in your, let's see if I can zoom in. Here, let me just hop out of here.
It is on page 10 in the attachments.
So if people have their computers, they can expand
Sorry,
it
yeah,
and take a look at it.
I've been trying to go predominantly digital.
It's the red line
Yeah,
on that map, if you can see that.
it's on page 10,
Let me throw this over here.
that shows the TOD overlay zoning.
Yeah, it's this red line right here. So yes, the TOD overlay goes down. It's, I believe, East Springs, and then kind of follows out to Lean, splitting down through the industrial general area. For the north, it goes pretty far up the hill, up Independence.
Well, it looks like that area is included in the TOD
is.
overlay.
So let me.
Didn't we approve or had a development in that area?
Con-
Sorry, didn't we have a recent development in that area that we considered? And I don't remember if we approved it or not, but it was down.
This property that's nearing completion. It's a 5-story residential,
Okay, right.
adjacent to the Boulevard site.
Approved a couple years ago. I have a question. I may be off base, but when we limit heights by stories, I'm thinking about when something is more commercial floors. Are we causing any problems for potential developments with a lot of commercial stories, or allowing them to be taller than they should be, or is it a combination of feet and stories?
Yeah, so within the plan, our real focus is stories. So when we get into actual implementation of the plan, the zoning code has maximum floor-to-floor heights that are allowable. We've tended to be pretty liberal with those because we really don't want to have, I think certain sections of our old code, particularly in the downtown area, it was formulaic. You were getting 10-foot floors, like floor-to-floor max that was it, through an FAR as well as kind of some other metrics that they had. And that resulted in really, really short floors. I think we as a policy decision decided to try to move away from that and be a little more liberal. So we do, technically within the zoning code, we measured floor-to-floor height differently in the downtown area as well as outside the downtown. They have different metrics, but they do basically do the same thing. Katie, do you know the floor-to-floor heights? Or not downtown, but outside the East Town.
What I'd like to create is a situation where we can give bonus floors for things that we want to encourage, like affordable housing or true green buildings. So that's one of my goals.
So this is actually I think that's one benefit of this approach. So bonus stories do get challenging in this situation because we have a cap that we can't go past. We are using the downtown height limits, or those relatively high floor to floor. That does give some capacity there. So these are basically 14-foot floor to floors. It's pretty generous. But we've seen, if you look at some recent approvals, particularly in residential, they're typically it's going to vary floor to floor and building to building, but I'd say 11 is pretty typical. So that's 3 feet per floor. We have to carry some other things, but there's probably in a lot of these 10, there's probably capacity for at least one more story. We have the 10 in the code. Maybe we change those red numbers to black, say this is our limit. We understand that it's pushing against, but if you wanted to create capacity for bonus, that would be a way of doing it. Again, this is kind of like It is akin to, within the downtown, I don't think we have the affordable housing bonus within those areas that have the capital height limit because they don't have a number of floors. Essentially, this is kind of a similar.
No.
Right.
Do you?
We do, yep.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do.
It's just it's a hard cap. So,
Right.
So I guess I'm not familiar with that because there's not a number of stories about height. So you're just saying, okay, I don't know. We can talk offline. I don't quite understand how that.
So question, is there anything specific in the height mapping that you would like direction on specifically before we move on? Because I'm conscious of time and there are a few other things to cover.
That would, we thought we'd have more questions for PC as we went through this, but it turns out that we don't have a lot of options. So if you're comfortable with this because of the height cap, what I guess I'm hearing is possibly look at turning those red numbers to black and saying this is the limit, and say that gives us a little bit of capacity for a bonus story if there's some policy that allows that.
Could you repeat what she said?
We'll have to check in with the city attorney's office to understand the capacity for bonus stories when the limitations reside in the plan and not in the zoning.
Good point, Katie.
Would that be a correct way of phrasing it? Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I think the important takeaway, if that's something you want us to explore,
yes,
that will be a good takeaway to
Yes.
direction from the
Yes,
Plan Commission as we proceed.
So next relatively quick time. Oh,
Wait.
To explore the high for green places or this area for whatever, for bonus places?
What I'm understanding is the direction is to explore the legal process for a potential bonus story when the height resides in the land use recommendations rather than the actual zoning code.
So that we could provide affordable housing.
Yeah, but
if
we already have
bonus.
that technically, right? So are we adding to the one about green spaces though?
The downtown,
I
though.
get it. I mean, I get it, but we already have kind of a framework for that. So
Mm-hmm.
do we want to also ask if we can get away with more green spaces as a bonus area?
Well, yeah, that would be part of it too.
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
I want to make sure.
Yeah.
I think as far as the plan and what we can, most valuable input the Plan Commission can give us is like what you're interested in seeing. And then we can go and like work out the mechanisms and figure out the feasibility. We're just really tonight looking for some direction on some of these things. So I think we got that.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next topic, just really quick, official mapping. So there was an investigation during the Greater Easttown Plan. The Greater Easttown ended up with a pretty different approach to official mapping than the Odana area plan, and we're trying to be a little bit more consistent across the board. My apologies that this is a little small, but so certain segments did get officially mapped. Let me grab my laser pointer again. I think that looks better. So part of High Crossing Extension, just a little bit. So from its current terminus, basically to, I'm going to say Best Buy. That's where it terminated there. So we have almost a cul-de-sac, basically, officially mapped. Our thought was extend it to kind of cross, I think that's Zaire, Lean? I can't remember. Zaire, thank you. I think this is kind of important because it kind of punches the box on both sides. I think we're looking at that Zaire frontages where we see most of the capacity for short-term development on those underutilized parking areas. If we reserve just a little bit there, that gets those future buildings in the right spot. We're not necessarily, I think we're trying to be as pragmatic as possible, understanding that we don't know the shelf life of Easttown. We're not rushing to see it demoed, but it'll happen in its own time. So kind of punching the boxes right there, as well as on the extension to Lean through that block. We are, like the other plans, we're trying to avoid conflicts with the existing buildings because we cannot issue building permits in these areas. That's kind of thing. We don't want to get in the way of maintenance of those areas. The other main street that we thought makes sense is kind of this southern pathway. So kind of just north of the current mall area. What we did in the Oscar Mayer process, which I think worked really well, is after the adoption process, we looked at these alignments very closely with engineering. We adjusted them in some cases just slightly to make sure that if we are officially mapping, we're actually getting it at some place that is engineerable, that is buildable, that makes sense. I could potentially see a small adjustments of that, as a further investigation merits. And then just kind of establishing those kind of cross streets as well as there. So that is kind of what we saw as the potential opportunities to pursue that officially map. If Plan Commission believes these are the correct ones, we intend to begin discussing these publicly with those affected property owners coming up in April.
Black lines, they're already in progress?
Black lines are planned streets within the plans that have been, we kind of think about them as neighborhood streets. So our kind of past policies that we've been working on from Plan Commission's direction have been to officially map those streets that are those primary connections that we think are very, very important in linking those areas together. I like to think about streets as kind of having two tiers: the primary streets that link things, and then the kind of the street network that breaks up these super blocks into the walkable blocks. We have a little less concern about how those street networks happen. We're a little more flexible in those in our plans and kind of how they get implemented. We see them, we do everything we can in the approval process to make sure that they happen in a way that is pedestrian oriented, creates an urban grid. But, if it happens exactly as is shown in the plan, we have less concern about those. We're trying to find that good mix of officially mapping the most critical streets while not being so burdensome that we're very dictatorial about where those streets go.
Can I ask a quick question? So I think I ask this like every time we talk about official mapping. Is the official map available to the public?
We are working. It is, at this point, it is, to my knowledge, not available. And actually, that's something that we're working on because we had to figure out exactly what was officially mapped to even make this map. Mm-hmm. Going back through the approval history, I know that's something that engineering is working on. It's recorded on it's recorded, but it's not easily available. But it's something that seems to be a clear plan recommendation that we should include as a process of a kind of that citywide issue of making that.
Yeah, it's
I think I have a lot of hesitancy official mapping things when it's not available for people to see. I understand that there's communication with the existing property owners, but that changes quickly if someone else purchases that property. They have no idea.
Okay.
And one other question, quick, sorry.
Can I just follow up on that? Is there any requirement or anything on a property sale for the purchaser to be informed at all about that kind of official mapping?
Not that I'm aware, unless they know of it and then feel like they have to disclose it. But they could also very well not know about it.
Yeah, because that's another thing that could help with that issue. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
My other question was just on the little section at the bottom of the image that was by the Goodwill there. I think when we looked at this with the Easttown plan, there was a property owner there and this went through their property and they were concerned about that. And I believe there was going to be further discussion as to if that could be moved. Is this reflecting that move or is it still going through their property?
So this, in the plan, I think we are still kind of just showing that general connection. What as I mentioned, I really like those follow-up processes to evaluate those areas more specifically. We're aware of that kind of unique situation with the barn property. And we, have talked to Alderfield about that. And so we're not necessarily at this point showing the exact alignment because we don't know exactly the outcome, but we do intend on working that as kind of the follow-up process to these. I think it really is one of those processes that's most appropriate as a follow-up process because the Oscar Mayer process, official mapping, took far longer than we thought between, working with traffic engineering to get a really good alignment worked out in terms of their turning radiuses to avoid certain things, to get the legal description prepared and back in front of council and a couple revisions. It takes time.
So is there, to get to Commissioner Solheim's concern, is there a way that we could assure that accompanying these new plans that at least the official mapping for these areas is out and publicly available?
Yes, we can definitely work to get a online map with that available. I think it will take some work to get all the balance of the officially mapped streets available, but we can get that available online, at least for this area as we move forward.
Okay.
On a related note, I get confused about where we are in the process, but what type of community meetings and things will happen at this point forward so people could learn about these things?
Sure. So we are in the process of scheduling kind of a follow-up neighborhood meeting really focused on officially mapping and rezoning.
Okay.
We wanted to get PC's input on kind of the thoughts and the approaches before we bring it publicly because we know that rezonings can, it takes a lot of proactive communication and making sure that people understand what's happening, the why it's happening, and kind of showing them what it means. And so our concern, if we were just to send out postcards for a neighborhood meeting saying, we're considering rezoning to a broad audience, I think it could create a lot of anxiety where it may or may not be warranted. And so we're trying to be very cautious with that about really being proactive with our communication about what we're doing, why we're doing it. Actually, not even what we're doing, what we're recommending.
So the discussions would take place with the property owners prior to plan adoption.
That's correct.
And then any potential official mapping will take place after plan adoption. So with the outreach discussion prior, and then anything actually being initiated would be after.
Sorry, second question. Will Transportation Commission have a look at this?
They will have a look at this as part of the adoption process. If you'd like them to weigh in on the level of streets. And again, this is what I think about this is kind of this is highlighting those streets that we think are most appropriate, not exactly where they go or when it happens. It's kind of a checklist. So should we look at this street? Should we look at this street? And then as a follow-up process, we want to make sure those notifications are out there so if people vehemently object, they can object during this planning process as well. Come and participate, but understanding that most of the highly detailed technical work will be a follow-up.
So are you suggesting that it should go to Transportation Commission at this stage in the process?
I was wondering if it did. Yeah, I'm not sure. As long as, if they're not going to see it until it's the final draft. I mean, they've seen it once before though, haven't they?
Yeah, so they've seen this general network before. This is not new. They adopted it as part of the Greater Easttown Area Plan.
So Chris, as our rep crossover, what are your thoughts on that? Has it been communicated enough or whatever? Or do you?
I don't want to represent Transportation Commission on that question because I'm reluctant to say more needs to go to Transportation Commission, but yeah, I don't know.
I mean, this is in some ways fine-tuning a little bit, so maybe it doesn't need to go to TC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
At a certain point, it's more of I think a plan commission issue because it speaks to more how you get the streets rather than exactly. They've weighed in on where they grow and the general pattern. There will be an opportunity during the actual official map process to weigh in on things like width of right of way and the exact alignment. So this is not, I like to think this is very kind of high level at this point, and we're going to get to the nitty gritty as we move forward.
Alderfield?
Yeah, so I want to maybe just ask you to expand on something that you just said. So a really good example is the case near Goodwill, the extension of Parkside Drive, where we've gone back and forth some already between planning and traffic engineering and others looking at alternatives to completing this street extension at a different location along the adjoining street that wouldn't bisect a property or that would minimize impacts in other ways. To what extent is the official mapping location in this plan adaptable when we're actually looking at the proposal to officially map?
I like to think the streets in a plan are really like a loose string on a pin at each end, right? We kind of generally know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And so we're actually, in that particular case, it's a string on one end and kind of a hanging at the bottom, right? We're really more concerned about getting Parkside to Sycamore or Mendota and finding that good location for it to go. There's flexibility. I don't think this map is saying it's going to go exactly in this location because, I mean, look what happened in Oscar Mayer. There was a fair number of changes that occurred between what the plan said and actually what was officially mapped. And that the process played out, I think, pretty well. And you know, there was different perspectives heard. There was different alternatives discussed. And ultimately it was adopted. And now we have development on that parcel.
And we have 10 minutes. So my question is, are people generally comfortable with this streets mapping?
One quick question. So will the official map, when we vote on it and it goes to get adopted, all of these conversations we're talking about already happened? The pins have been finalized, or it's after we approve it?
So what right now what we're asking Plan Commission is are these generally the streets that you think are the appropriate ones to officially map? That will initiate conversations with the property owner. We start that public conversation. That is the objective of that is to really make sure that they are aware that this is going through a planning process. We will not begin kind of the engineering and the analysis until after this plan. So you will not be voting on the exact alignments as part of the adoption process. It really will be, are these the right corridors? And we're going to work through that alignment post. Those will definitely go back to Plan Commission for approval after in that follow-up process. They will go to TC, Plan Commission, and Council before they are officially mapped.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it seems a little icky a little bit that we're saying, yes, it's going here, but trust us, it's going to figure out, because I kind of felt that way with the West Town one.
Well, kind of that's what plans are,
Right.
though, in a way, you know,
Yeah.
it's not absolute. There are, it's just general.
We're touching people's livelihoods that we're saying.
And that's why
in
it's,
the middle of it.
that's why it's important that they be brought into this process before it is even the plan.
Right.
And that communication is vital, I think, to make sure that that happens
Like
before.
we've talked about, as long as they're in the plan, because it sounded like some of them weren't.
Mhm.
Whether or not that's true, you know, that's
Right.
hearsay somewhat, but as long as they're in that plan discussion, then it's a little bit more comfortable, but as long as.
Yeah, yeah.
In general, these make sense to me. I'd like to work with staff, though, on the communication about how we're describing the phasing of this and the order, in particular because there is more history behind Parkside Drive and what we've been doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So we obviously are not going to get through the rest of this. Our next Plan Commission meeting is shaping up to be a little heavier, in part because of all the referred items. The one following may be light enough to put the remainder of this onto that Plan Commission meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at a point where we need to retool some of the balance of the recommendations based on some of the land use changes. I think there's also been a little bit of change in philosophy about how we want to approach some of the rezonings. I think I can give you, I want to highlight just a couple of these. So the first four, these are largely from the Hawthorne-Truex plan. These are relatively straightforward. They're about, the two mixed-use ones, 1 and 2, are about really kind of having consistent zoning for areas that we think are largely appropriate for redevelopment. We're not forcing that. We're not creating non-conforming, or the recommendation isn't to create non-conforming. It's really just create more consistency on areas adjacent to tier. 3 and 4, again, those are more about discouraging residential in areas where the plan already is discouraging residential. Just kind of using those.
Is this the same one that's in our slides? What page are you on?
This is a combination of the map and the tables.
There's no label.
But the chart is labeled Northeast Area Plan Proactive Rezoning Matrix.
Yep, this is the matrix.
Okay, so it's the same one that's
So
in
we
there,
have
'cause
over
it's
here.
a little hard to see on
Yep,
there.
it's the matrix, the rezoning map, the land use map.
The red lines is the.
TOD. Yep. So the main questions that we really actually wanted to pose to PC are about 5 and 7. It's again about those areas that we see zoning mismatches with land use. They're kind of pulling in different directions, but we have a lot of competing interests with things like official mapping. I think we can have more internal conversations. Again, this is not something I think it's critical to, it's not going to break the plan if we get information from PC at a later date. But we can certainly move to adjust those. I think 5 and 7 are the more difficult ones. 8, 6 are pretty straightforward. They are about kind of matching those land uses, about encouraging mixed use where we're saying we want mixed use from the zoning or from the generalized future land use, and then discouraging residential in areas that we're already saying through the land use we want to discourage residential. But yes, we can definitely bring those back as well.
So we can pick up then with the rezonings, the proactive rezonings, and if there's anything that you want to adjust before we get together then, which would be in about 3 weeks, I guess, then that would be fine too. Any final wrap-up comments?
Thank you.
Questions? Okay. Seeing none. Any business by members? Any communications? And we will not have a secretary's report unless.
I had like 45 minutes worth of stuff I But I'll save that for another meeting.
Kevin, sit here and wait, and we'll be back. Okay?
Okay, so I am looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, moved and seconded, and seeing no objection, we are adjourned. And thank you for your efforts on this.
Who's the motion secretary?